Okay, bye.
Bye-bye. There's an old Chinese story about a Naga goddess, Nu Kwa. She created the first people out of clay. On the other side of the Pacific, Native Americans said that Coyote created the mountains and the rivers and made the fish therein. Of course, in the Middle East, the fabled creator was the Jewish volcano god known as Jehovah, though there were a few other, even older creator gods too. Believers never wonder what these gods were doing before there was a world to do things in, or where they came from, even though they all apparently came from the land of pure imagination. Initially, the religious position was that the earth was a flat disk divided into four quadrants, erected on pillars or columns like a map spread out on a table, and that it was covered by a giant crystal dome with windows in it because these primitive people thought that space was full of water and that these windows are where the rain came from. It was a common belief across Asia, with different religions positing that whichever god might cover the dome of the sky, stretching out the heavens over the firmament like a tent, as sometimes with the stars sewn into the fabric of the veil of night. But in the Jewish tradition, the stars were contained within the expanse of this dome, along with the sun and the moon and all the other planets, which of course were all much, much smaller than the Earth and even smaller than the moon. They didn't know that the Earth was just another planet, and they didn't know that the sun was one of the stars. They thought that the stars were tiny little things that had thinking minds and personalities, because that's the way the Bible describes them. Not kidding. And this wasn't just in ancient times either. I've actually met people like this. There's an awful lot of people today who still believe in this model, or another similar one without a firmament, where the sun and the moon and all the other planets are still smaller than the Earth and orbit around it. They also believe that the Earth is the first thing in the universe, the biggest thing in the universe, and of course the center of the universe. And even if they don't hold to such an extreme view, it is alarming how many religious people don't believe in outer space but do believe that the Earth is flat. And there are dedicated religious apologists who accept that the world is round but still believe that the sun orbits the Earth. There are also some who accept that the Earth orbits the sun but think that our solar system is the center of the universe and that everything literally revolves around us. Then we discovered the Big Bang. Astronomers saw that other galaxies were moving away from us fast enough to be redshifted in spectroscopy, such that it appears that the universe is expanding or inflating. If you extrapolate backwards, then everything was closer together in the past, culminating in, or rather originating in, a single point where everything, and I mean everything, flew apart from there. Matter, energy, universal forces, natural laws, and even empty space and time began at that point. So anyone asking about the state of the universe before it existed or what happened before the beginning of time obviously doesn't understand the question they're asking. It's like trying to travel to a point south of the South Pole. Religious extremists delight in saying that scientists have proven that the universe had a beginning, and they use that argument against the Big Bang, but the Big Bang is our proof that the universe had a beginning. Cosmologists, cosmogonists, and astrophysicists tried to work out what was happening, and they produced a model in which everything in the universe rapidly erupted from a small, hot, dense state roughly 13.7 billion years ago. This discovery was initially ridiculed as a Big Bang, but the pejorative name calling stuck, and that's what we call it now. Understand that a goal without a deadline is just a dream, or a prophecy. So any proposed explanation has to have two things. It has to meet certain predictions that should only happen if we're on the right track, and there has to be some way to prove it wrong if we're not. And no one's ever found any data to contradict the Big Bang. So they worked out that if this hypothesis is correct, there should be a particular type of cosmic microwave background radiation to indicate that, and such was actually discovered to exist. It was a Nobel Prize-winning discovery in the 1970s, and it implies that the universe really is expanding and apparently has been since the literal beginning of time. There's some talk of a singularity being a favorite component of that explanation, but physicists aren't really entirely certain about that. What they tell me is that they don't know anything prior to 10 to the negative 43rd seconds after the Big Bang, if in fact that is a fair description of what that is. But they say they actually know everything after that in spectacular detail. So we have only a very small window of the tiniest fraction of a second in which to speculate. Where did it all come from? There are many fallacious appeals to ridicule of what we actually know, one of them being that scientists are supposed to think that complex order, including life, was somehow created by an explosion. But no scientist believes that. Besides, the Big Bang wasn't really an explosion in the same sense that nuclear fusion isn't really the same thing as a fire. And it happened 9 billion years before the accretion of the Earth, so it couldn't have anything to do with the beginning of life either. Another creationist distortion is that the Big Bang is somehow part of evolution and that evolution requires something coming from nothing. By evolution, they mean all scientific explanations that contradict their favorite fables, so nearly every field of science. But again, we didn't come from nothing, and no scientist believes that we ever came from absolutely nothing. The Big Bang is not something from nothing. Even when cosmologists talk about a universe from essentially nothing, they don't mean an absolute philosophical nothing. In fact, they don't think that an absolute nothing is even possible, because every time they try to create a perfect vacuum, they notice quantum fluctuations with subatomic particles popping in and out of existence where there shouldn't be anything. Otherwise, logically, we can't get something from nothing, right? So something must be eternal without a beginning, and it could be the matter and energy of this universe. Because we know from the theory of relativity that gravity bends the fabric of space-time, and extreme gravity punches a hole in it. That's what black holes were thought to be. So imagine we have all the gravity of the entire cosmos compressed into a single point. That could cause a rift in the time-space continuum. And maybe that could happen from either side of the boundaries of this universe, which means that all the matter and energy, which are interchangeable one from the other, could have entered this universe from the source of the multiverse, such that myriad universes could be popping in and out of existence like bubbles in the bottom of a saucepan coming to boil, and we'd never know about these other ones because we're trapped within this one. There's no reason why the multiverse shouldn't be eternal, but in a sense this universe could also at least be energetic matter too, because another property of excessive gravity is that it slows down time. So again, if you had the combined gravity of all the matter in the universe compressed into a singularity, if you will, it would slow time down to a stop. So imagine an asymptote on a Cartesian coordinate system, which slows down time as you move backward through time toward the Big Bang, such that 1 second stretches out to equal infinity when t equals 0. That would mean that although the expansion of the universe had a beginning, the material energy within it is eternal. It was literally always here. It could also be that our universe changes states, that the one we're in, where entropy increases, was preceded by an earlier version where entropy decreases, and where energy is cumulative, where everything came together instead of flying apart until it reached a pinnacle where it reversed the physical laws to begin this alternate subsequent universe where everything slows down and gets colder instead. But even if we were to imagine that the matter of energetic material energy had to come from somewhere beyond the universe, outside of space and time, then remember that time is a fourth dimension, but it's only a temporal dimension. It could be that the Big Bang represents a fourth spatial dimension moving into and thus inflating three-dimensional space, the same way a three-dimensional object appears to appear out of nothing when trying to move through a two-dimensional plane. It would look to us like something coming from nothing, even though it really came from somewhere else before. And what could be the catalyst for all this? The first mover that the Wanda believers want to imagine. Well, it could be the random motions of supercosmic membranes, or who knows what else. Why is the interior of our universe shaped like this? There is no indication that any intelligent agent even could have been involved in any of this. And remember that the sacred fables don't have a lot of credibility, being absolutely wrong about absolutely everything they claim that can be tested. So I would say that any of these other ideas are at least equally valid to the religious idea, except that we know that a God isn't possible at all. And the important thing is that this is all just speculation, including God. If there is no way to test any hypothesis to show which one has more or less credence than another, and if there's no way to eliminate which ones are completely wrong, then it wouldn't matter what explanations we come up with. Even if you're right, if there's no way to show that, to know that, with no evidence to back it and no way to verify or falsify it, then it's effectively meaningless and doesn't warrant serious consideration. So where did everything come from? No one knows. Certainly not you, and you've no reason to pretend that you do, or to pretend you know someone who does, because you don't. I've read your holy books, and they reveal that your God doesn't know it either. He doesn't even know where the sun came from, or what it is, or what the moon is. Everything the Bible says about the earth in relation to the rest of the cosmos is laughably, embarrassingly wrong, and has been known to be wrong for thousands of years. The more we know, the more it shows that God doesn't know any more than the ignorant, primitive, superstitious savages pretending to speak for him back in the Bronze Age when everyone thought the world was flat and no one yet knew anything that was actually true. So anytime believers hear that you can't explain the origin of life, the universe, and everything, they think that it means that it must have been this dog, or snake girl, or more commonly, some dream of genie, when in fact, all these ideas are equally absurd and none of them even could be the right answer. Whatever the reality is, it is surely far more abstruse and complicated than these creatures of the id. Gods and magic are the simplest and most infantile excuses men have ever invented to explain things they obviously didn't and still don't even want to understand.
Are we good here?
But if you do a test on a train or, like you said, on a plane, and just simply jog from the front of the moving train to the rear, and maybe time yourself, or just observe, and then do the same thing running or jogging to the front of the moving train. I've done this myself. I promise you that you'll find that it is much easier to run from the front of the train to the rear.
That's your test? Pretty tough to reproduce, don't you think? Here's an idea. What if it was harder to jog to the front of the train because the train was speeding up slightly? Try it again when the train is slowing down. I bet your results will change. Sorry, this is not a valid experiment.
25-mile target from New Jersey has exactly 90 seconds. In the 90 degrees and just straight to the equator to hit that lighthouse. It takes 90 seconds for the bullet to get there. The problem is, 90 seconds at the equator, the Earth moves 25 miles. So it takes 90 seconds for the bullet to get from the ship to the lighthouse. But in that 90 seconds, the lighthouse moves 25 miles. So you're going to miss it by 25 miles.
Here's the funny part. You so thoroughly don't understand conservation of momentum that when you presented this whole bit to me, it was supposed to have something to do with the Coriolis effect. But like I said, this basic fact of physics has nothing to do with the atmosphere. The boat and the bullet and lighthouse are all moving around the Earth together, and the bullet will continue with the same momentum that the boat has once it leaves the gun. Again, super easy to prove. Get back on that moving truck. This time, bring a friend, and pass a ball back and forth. You will observe that the ball does not fly off the back of the truck when it leaves your hands. Instead, you will be passing it precisely as you would expect if you were just standing on the ground. Another way of expressing this is that you two and the ball and the truck constitute an inertial reference frame. This is another thing that you guys have a really hard time with, so let's go through that too.
Here is a much more accurate depiction in the heliocentric model of what our solar system is actually doing. Now, where is Kepler's laws in this particular model, Dave? The mathematics for this are not being taken into account.
This graphic is stupid. The blue trails don't exist or mean anything, and the solar system is not a vortex. All the motion happens within a plane, and we see that plane in the sky. It's called the ecliptic, where all the planets live. But more importantly, what you're trying to imply is that because the solar system is moving through the galaxy, this should change all the laws of physics. It doesn't. Here's why. Let's do another experiment. Drop a ball and see how long it takes to hit the ground. Now let's get back on that truck, move at a constant velocity relative to the ground, and do it again. We get the same thing. Now get on a plane and do it again. The plane is moving much faster, but you still get the same result. Each of these is an inertial reference frame. The laws of physics are exactly the same in every inertial reference frame, so the results of this experiment are the same in each of these frames, no matter what speed it is moving relative to something else. That's because all motion is relative to something else. So I'm sorry, it doesn't matter how fast the solar system is moving relative to the center of the Milky Way, or how fast the Milky Way is moving relative to some other galaxy. There is no absolute motion. There is only relative motion. And these big numbers that you're throwing out for shock value are irrelevant to what you're saying. We can treat the solar system as an inertial reference frame, and the physics works just fine.
Learn about inertial reference frame. I knew you were going to say that. We're going to show you all about inertial reference frames, Dave.
Really, you know?
The inertial reference frames aren't going to cut it. These are absolute motions that they're telling us that they're going.
I told you, there's no such thing as absolute motion.
Yeah, there's no such thing as absolute motion. I love this. This is so great.
Yeah, there isn't. I'm sorry if you don't understand that. It's not my problem.
If science is telling us that we're going at all these velocities, then you're telling science that it's not true.
A summoner has reconnected.
Okay, let's shift gears and come back down to Earth. You guys have a lot to say here, especially regarding the stars in the night sky.
Because the stars have never changed in all of recorded history, all of millennia. Nothing has ever changed.
False. It's the North Star. Right now, it's Polaris. In the time of the ancient Egyptians, it was another star called Thuban, which is documented. In a few thousand years, it'll be a different one still. The precession is extremely slow. Any thoughts?
So over 18 years, we should have seen a misalignment between our axis of rotation, Neptune, and Polaris.
Yeah, you can. Just not with the naked eye. The change is very tiny.
Now, the globe Earth proponents say there used to be a different North Star 6,000 years ago, and there will be another new North Star in another 6,000 years, but that's just kicking the can out so far that nobody can observe it in the future. I mean, we're all going to be long gone in 6,000 years.
I'm sorry that astronomical phenomena don't conform to your lifespan. It doesn't make them fake. Also, if this was all made up, why make up this part? Why deliberately introduce the problem of the precession of the rotational axis if it's not needed for anything? It makes no sense. Then comes this bit about the personal dome.
That's all the stars we can see. The stars lower to the horizon on the edge of that circle. 12,000. So as you move, this dome of stars moves with you when you're done with vision.
We could deconstruct the absurdity of this idea for 10 hours, but I'll just say one thing. You can use the words perspective and refraction all you want, but that's all conjecture unless you can build a physical model that predicts the position in the sky of any star for any person anywhere in the world. Do that, and then we'll talk. Staying on the Earth, let's check out this bizarre tangent you took into ecology.
At 65 degrees north latitude, Iceland thrives with 800 native plant species and abundant animals. Compare this to Georgia Island, which, despite being full 11 degrees closer to the equator than Iceland, at 54 degrees south latitude, is nearly devoid of any aquaculture, having only a measly 18 native plant species, and virtually no animals.
There are no animals on this one island, therefore the Earth is flat. Got it. Sorry guys, there's a lot more to ecology and climate than just latitude. Again, easy to prove. What's the hottest place on Earth? Death Valley, California. Notice that it is nowhere near the equator. Take a look at the distribution of biomes around the world. There is some correlation with latitude, but it's not perfect. Pick a latitude and see a desert over here, a rainforest over there, and all sorts of things. And finally, the thing with the animals is just stupid. The distribution of animal species is subject to an incredible set of variables that are irrelevant to this discussion.
And you're saying, what does animals and foliage have to do with it, Dave? Well, everything, really, when you think about it.
All you can really assume is that the continent of Antarctica should be super cold. And yeah, it is. It's right on the South Pole. As it happens, you had lots to say about Antarctica as well. Namely because it's the super secret edge-based fortress whatever, and no one can go there.
There's so few of them, and all of them, by the way, are Masons, right? Or royal family or something like that. But the average Joe can't go down there.
Sure, only Freemasons can go there. Or all of these people. Guys, just Google Antarctica cruise. Literally anyone can go there, and they do so every day. Sure, only to certain spots, but Antarctica is a huge, frozen, bare wasteland. No tourist would want it for Earth. I believe that not allowed because why not?
No, Dave, NASA is not guarding it. NASA is an American government agency. It is guarded by the combined military force of all the parties to the Antarctic Treaty. And how do they guard it? Where's the budget for it? Have you ever heard of a black budget project, Dave? Probably not, because you believe that the government is legitimate in every way, shape, and form. Have you ever heard of radar, Dave, where you don't have to have people walking guards? They can see ships, they can see planes coming in. It's really quite easy, Dave, but here's your ignorance shining through, buddy.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Okay, the combined military of many nations is guarding it, except we can't see any military personnel, or any military ships, or any military buildings, or any evidence for that whatsoever. Got it. And also, we can't sail anywhere near there?
You will find out why people are not allowed down there. It's because of the Antarctic Treaty.
Okay, so what's that? Let's take a look.
Shut down.
So, these are the countries that you say have their military there. Now, what does it say? No military bases, got it. No nuclear bombs, got it. I don't know, looks pretty riveting, but I don't see anything about getting shot down on sight if you approach it in a boat. Even if you insist that no one is allowed below a certain parallel, what's stopping you from getting in a ship and sailing around the world directly on that parallel? Time it and compare it to what a round Earth expects. That sounds like a pretty good experiment. Let's move on to gravity. This one's a big problem for you guys, because if the Earth isn't round, then gravity doesn't make any sense, and there's no reason for objects to fall towards the ground. Let's see what you've come up with.
You know, what goes up must come down is absolutely a thing here in reality. Nobody's arguing that. But as you said, causing that on the space of Earth is the massive Earth orbiting physical space and non-physical time.
Space-time. One thing.
So I'm really not sure how you can bend time, but maybe that's just because I'm a stupid flat earther. But here's the thing. First of all, you can't demonstrate in reality that mass attracts mass. There's no sort of experiment or data or test that you can do.
False. This was done with the Cavendish experiment all the way back in the 18th century, long before NASA in-house.
And oh goodness, what was his name? The stupid balls in the shed experiment
Cavendish.
or whatever.
Cavendish.
Yeah, the Cavendish experiment certainly notwithstanding. but there's no evidence to suggest that mass attracts mass.
All you did was name the experiment that does the thing you're asking for and then proceed to say nothing about it. Physics undergrads do this experiment all over the world all the time. If you think it's invalid, explain why.
But of course, Professor Dave will come back and say, "Oh, it's done every day. How did you do that?" Okay, whatever. And it certainly is not done the way Cavendish did it.
Looks pretty similar to me. Also, why should it matter? Your mantra is do your own research. You seem to think that science students are just told what to believe. Shouldn't you be encouraging them to do these classic experiments for themselves so that they can verify? What was it again?
You guys know what the idea behind Cavendish was, right? To measure the mass
of the Earth, right?
Wrong. The purpose of the Cavendish experiment was to calculate the gravitational constant, g. We knew these two masses and the distance between them, so measuring the force of attraction allowed us to calculate g. Once we knew g, we were then able to calculate the mass of the Earth, but that's just an application of this knowledge.
It's funny how they always go to that.
So really all we have here is you guys talking incorrectly about an experiment and then offering no basis whatsoever for why you think it's invalid. Let's see what other problems you have with gravity.
And if you assume that the Earth is a spinning ball, what you would expect is that objects that are on the surface of the spinning ball would tend to be propelled away from the center due to centrifugal force. And so gravity is a necessity in the ball Earth theory to counteract that force and assure that objects are stuck to the sides of the spinning sphere.
Wow, an actual legitimate question. Yes, there is a centrifugal force due to Earth's rotation. It's quite easy to calculate. Let's look at this force at the equator, where it's greatest. In general, F equals ma, and for this force, F equals mv squared over r.
What's going on?
Breaks down for a new model in the case of the whole brain collectively, and really the rest of the body. A higher awareness is going to be inconclusive by a definitional fiat. But again, I had the same impression of Eric's argument that he had of mine.
Degrees. I'm an all or nothing. So, for example,
Ready. All right, let me pull that up real quick, Eric. Hold on 1 second.
no problem. Can you hear me all right?
Yeah, I can hear you just fine. All right, let me pull this up. All right, Eric, go ahead, take it away, man. You got it for 15 minutes.
All right. So, the question for tonight's debate is, does the soul exist? And I want to start by giving you two things that this debate is not. First, this debate is not about religion or how people came to believe in the soul. In the past, Arn said that people believed in the soul because they didn't know what air was. Doesn't apply to me, and that's irrelevant, and that would also be a genetic fallacy, so hopefully we won't get any of that. Second, the debate is not a scientific question. This is the case for a few reasons. First of all, it's a category fallacy. The soul, if it exists, would be a non-physical entity, and science, by definition, is a discipline that can only study the physical. Thus, while science is a wonderful tool for investigating the physical world, it has virtually nothing to say about the non-physical. In fact, science in principle cannot even ask the question, much less answer it. Some of the leading neuroscientists in the world, like Jeffrey Schwartz and Mario Beauregard, believe in the soul, and one can't say that they believe in the soul because they don't understand the neuroscience, given that these are some of the men that are the leaders in neuroscience. In addition, any view that will be presented tonight regarding consciousness or the nature of the soul will be what is called empirically equivalent, meaning there is no piece of empirical data that one could give that would specifically lend support to one view over the other. Put differently, we'll agree on all the empirical data, but our conclusions that we draw from the data will be philosophical and scientific. This is because the questions are philosophical questions about metaphysics, not science. As atheist philosopher of science Michael Ruse says, science does not ask certain questions, so it is to no surprise that it does not give certain answers. So appealing to science to answer the question tonight would be like appealing to a ruler to measure your weight. The assessment. The case that I'm going to give is just two basic points tonight. First is that consciousness is not physical. That is to say, it's neither identical nor reducible to anything physical like the brain. And two, I am more than a brain and body. I am a soul. Now, a definition, what is a soul? The soul is an immaterial substance that contains consciousness and animates the body. Now, in order to understand that these two arguments, it's important to first get a foundation and a grasp of what is called Leibniz's law of the indiscernibility of identicals, and for short, we'll call it Leibniz's law of identity. Now, according to Leibniz's law of identity, if two things in question are the same, let's say some A and B, then whatever is true of one is going to be true of the other and vice versa. However, in principle, if you can show something true of one that is not true of the other, then it follows that the two are not the same thing. Now, if there is no soul and there is no God, then physicalism would be true, which is a view that human beings are purely physical objects, only purely physical properties and parts. Now, the reason this is important is because if Arne is going to show that there is no soul, then he's going to have to show that the mind is nothing more than the brain. That is to say, it is identical or reducible to states of the brain. However, if this is actually not the case, and in principle we can show something that is true of the mind that is not true of the brain and vice versa, then it would follow that the mind is not identical or reducible to the brain. And if that's the case, then it would follow that consciousness is not physical and physicalism would be false. Now, there are a good number of ways to show that this is the case. Excuse me. There are quite a number of ways to show this, and basically we'll just go over a few for time's sake. Using Leibniz's law of identity, we can actually see that the mind and brain are not identical because they share different properties. So, for example, take the states of my mind and the states of the brain. My thoughts or beliefs can be true or false, but no state of my brain is true or false. In fact, in the past, Arne has called consciousness a physical function of the brain, but the same problem is that my thoughts, again, can be true or false, but a state or a function of the brain cannot be true or false. In fact, it doesn't even make sense, and I wouldn't even know what that means to say that a function is true or false. I can hold beliefs to certain degrees, but I don't hold my neurons firing or brain states to certain degrees. My brain can weigh 3 pounds, but my belief that I'm speaking to Arne does not weigh 3 pounds. I can open my skull and look at my brain, but I don't open my skull and look at my thoughts because consciousness is a first-person, private access kind of thing. So, in other words, while a neuroscientist can know more about my brain than I do, he can never know more about my mental life than I do. My brain can be 7 inches long, but the smell of a rose or taste of a banana, which is in my mind, is not 7 inches long. Mental states have intentionality, my brain states do not. For example, when I'm hungry, my neurons aren't hungry. When I have an itch, my neurons aren't itching. These are mental states that are not characteristic of my brain states. Now, there are many more examples we could go through. It's clear and suffice to say that if the states and properties of the mind are not physical, and if all the properties of the brain are physical, then it would follow that consciousness, if it exists, cannot be something identical nor reducible to something physical like the brain, which would follow that physicalism would be false. Now, I want to point something out here, and that is that there is a difference between a cause or dependence relationship and a relationship of identity. I want you to note that this is important because Arne and I would both agree that if you mess with certain regions of my brain, it would affect certain states of my mind. No one denies this, and I want to make that clear. Nevertheless, it's important to understand that cause or effect does not establish identity. So, say for example, you get a guitarist, and he gets an instrument like a guitar, and if a guitar string pops, he may be unable to play the music, and thus we have a cause and effect or a dependent relationship, but it doesn't follow that he is a guitar. It could also be the case that certain parts of the guitar breaking would inhibit him from playing the note C, but again, it doesn't follow that the note C is in the guitar and that if you broke it open, you would find it. Again, all that to say that just because we can show a cause, effect, or dependent relationship between a musician and his guitar or the notes in a guitar, it doesn't follow that they're the same thing. So, while I don't deny, and on my view, it's actually expected that messing with states of my brain through various means can actually affect the states of my consciousness, it doesn't follow that they're the same thing. Why? Because as I mentioned in the beginning, cause or dependence is not the same thing as identity. So if Arn wants to show that consciousness is something physical, he's going to have to do far more than show that there's a cause-effect or dependency relationship between the mind and brain. At the very least, he's going to have to show that they necessarily share all the same properties, and that there is nothing true of the mind that is not true of the brain and vice versa. In other words, he's going to have to show identity. And unless he can do that, then for him to claim that consciousness is purely physical would be something that he would have to take merely on blind pistis, aka blind faith. Now, another thing to point out is the irreducibility of consciousness, which I won't have time to go into detail, but atheist philosopher Thomas Nagel has pointed this out in his book, that you cannot get mind from matter, and atheist philosopher Colin McGinn says that any naturalistic explanation for consciousness coming from matter would border on sheer magic. So for him, he calls this magic. So if you hear that word magic tonight, we're talking about something coming from matter, something like mind coming from matter, which these philosophers are saying is metaphysically impossible. Now, again, we don't deny that there are correlations in cause and effects, but as J.P. Moreland summarizes another atheist philosopher, Jaegwon Kim, saying that correlations are not explanations, but are in fact the very thing that need explaining. And the problem is you can't simply rearrange particles of matter and get something like consciousness squared into existence, any more than rearranging red bricks would give you the color blue, or rearranging the furniture in my house would give you the color purple. This is just simply not something that you get by rearranging a physical structure. Now, let's look at the second point, that I am more than my brain and body, I am a soul. Now, if, using again the law of identity, if physicalism is true, then I am nothing more than a brain and body. And this would mean that I am a mereological aggregate, which is a collection of separable parts held together in a certain structure. However, if that's the case and I'm just a purely physical object, then whatever is true of purely physical objects like aggregates would be true of me, but we know that that's not the case. So let's just go over a few. One is the indivisibility of personhood. And it would go like this. I'm either a purely physical object or an immaterial soul. Purely physical objects can be divided and come in percentages or degrees. I cannot be divided or come in percentages or degrees. I'm an all or nothing kind of thing. Therefore, I am not a purely physical object. Therefore, I am a soul. To understand this argument, it's important to understand the notion of a degreed and non-degreed property. A degreed property would be things that can fluctuate or come in percentages or degrees. Take, for example, the property of being hard or soft or loud. Such properties can be harder or louder or softer, so they fluctuate. Contrast that with a non-degreed property, something like the property of being even. The number 2 and the number 6 are both even, but it would make no sense to say that the number 6 is, quote, more even than the number 2, because the property of being even is an all or nothing kind of thing. It either is or it isn't. There is no in between. Now, the property of being a person, if physicalism is true, would have to be a degreed property that would be grounded in something like the brain and body. However, we know that's not the case because being a human person is not a degreed property. In other words, you can cut a table in half and it would make sense to say you get 50% of a table, but it makes no sense to say that I cut a person in half, like my arms and legs, and I get 50% of a person. Consider the same with respect to the brain. There is a Dandy-Walker syndrome or anencephaly disease, where some people only have 50% of a brain or 10% of a brain. Well, they're not 10% or 50% persons, they're still 100% persons. Moreover, it's also the case that men are typically larger than women, but just because men have more mass and matter than women, it doesn't mean that men are more valuable or are more persons than women, and I know Arn would agree with that. I have no doubt about that. Moving on, we have identity through change. Now, aggregates do not retain identity through change, and we'll get to that in a second. But the argument is, I'm either a purely physical object or an immaterial soul. If I'm a purely physical object, then I do not retain identity through change. I do maintain identity through change, therefore I'm not a purely physical object, therefore I am a soul. Now, if I'm nothing more than a brain and body, according to what we've learned through science, every 7 and 10 years you replace virtually every cell in your body. It's a little bit different with the brain, but you can still lose brain cells and whatnot. Now, suppose I committed a crime 7 and 10 years ago, but they just now find the evidence. Now, if the officers were to come to my house and say that, we're going to arrest you because we just now found the evidence of a crime you committed 7 to 10 years ago, it would make no sense to say that, officer, I'm no longer that person, because given that we change, I'm just a purely physical brain and body. I'm an aggregate, and aggregates do not maintain identity to change. Of course, he would laugh at me and slap on the cuffs. Interestingly, philosopher Jaegwon Kim that I mentioned earlier, he gives a similar argument to reflect on in his book. He says, in 2011, this brain and body did not exist, but I did exist in 2011, therefore I cannot be identical nor reducible to this brain and body, and I would conclude on that, therefore I am a soul. Next, we have an argument from free will. It would go as follows. I'm either a purely physical object or an immaterial soul. 2, if I'm a purely physical object and I do not possess free will. I do possess free will, therefore I am not a purely physical object, I am a soul. Now, to understand this, it's important to first, let me say what free will is. Free will I would define as being the originator or source of your will or actions. You're the first mover. Now, Aristotle used an illustration. He said, if I move a rock with my staff, then you could say that the staff moved the rock, my hand moved the staff for what moved me. Now, if there is no soul and there is no God, then the law of causal closure would be true, which states that every physical event must necessarily have a prior physical cause. So if Arn wants to believe there is free will, he's going to have to somehow show that he is the first mover to his will or actions. Now, what you can say at this point is, if you're going to say that your hand moved, you're going to have to point to something physical given the law of causal closure. You can say that your brain, a brain state, like a brain firing, caused your hand to move, that caused a staff to move, that caused a rock to move, but given that it was a physical event, you would still need a prior physical cause. At this point, you only have 2 options. You can get into an infinite regress of brain firings and physical events, but then that would mean that the action would never happen, or at some point, you can point to something beyond the physical and say that something beyond you caused that brain firing to fire, which caused the hand to move, that caused the staff to move, that caused the rock to move, but then you're no longer the first mover, you're merely an intermediate secondary mover. Now, that is to say, if all you are is something purely physical, you're not going to have free will. Now, I don't know what Arn's position is on free will, but I will say this. If Arn wants us to believe that he came to be an atheist freely, that is to say he came to be an atheist based on intellectual reasons, and if he believes that religious people are morally accountable for their beliefs and for what they do, then he's going to have to posit something like a soul. Because if you give up free will, you give up intellectual integrity and moral responsibility. So if Arn freely came to be an atheist, and if he wants to hold religious people accountable for their beliefs, then something like a soul must exist. So in summation, we can say that if consciousness exists, it can't be physical. If you're the same person from one moment to the next, you must be more than a brain and body. If men and women are equally valuable, then physicalism can't be true. And if Arn freely came to be an atheist and holds religious people morally responsible, then something like a soul must exist. Therefore, if we put all these together, we can say that here is a problem that Eris must face tonight. If he is conscious, if he is the same person at the beginning and end of this debate, if he is not above or more valuable than anyone, and if he freely came to be an atheist and is accountable for his actions, then it must be the case that physicalism is false, a soul must exist, and that would be the end of the debate. Thank you.
All right, Eric, thank you for that 50-minute opening statement. All right, Arn, you're up for your 50-minute opening.
Right. When the organizers of this debate invited me to participate, it was under a slightly different topic. They suggested we would do, is there evidence of a soul? And I said then I couldn't resist this topic as long as we were only talking about scientific evidence, since nothing else would make any sense in this context. Because if we don't have empirical, verifiable facts, then what have we got? 13 television seasons of Ghost Hunter, where they still never found anything ever, and we know they never will, but they always pretend like they did in every episode. The best you could have is when something can neither be explained if true nor confirmed to be true in the first place. There's nothing to explain. Besides, being unexplained is not an explanation. Yet, in the entire history of bewildering inanity claimed by spiritualists of every sort in any religion, none of them have ever shown even the slightest substance for their phantasms. No reason to believe that there was even a there there. Instead, what we typically always, only, ever see are empty assertions of impossible nonsense, or we find frauds. Like when that toddler got rich and famous selling 10 million books claiming to have been to heaven in a near-death experience, only to admit years later that he lied, being coached by his parents. He's not the only example of those type hoaxes. Religion is rife with them and based on them. So I said to the organizers, all I ask is that Eric share with me whatever peer-reviewed articles he intends to source a week before the debate to rebut them if I can, or at least confirm that they actually do say what he says they do. If they do, then I will have no choice but to admit that to you, the audience, when the time comes. But I should never have to take an opponent's word for some cited study that supports their position, because to my experience, they usually don't. I often see scientific articles misrepresented in debates when you finally get to the point where you can read it afterwards and you find out it really doesn't say or support what they said that it did, but you can't do anything about that when the first you've heard of it is during the debate, and you can't comment on what you haven't read. However, Eric instead said that he'd just drop the reference to evidence and change the topic of our debate to, does the soul exist? So that we're no longer restricted to, required to have, or much less allowed to share scientific evidence at all. And now apparently it's been precluded as a category fallacy. I thought you, the audience, should know that. So how do people come to imagine that we have an invisible spiritual version of ourselves hidden inside our physical bodies, driving them around like vehicles? If that were the case, there would be a way for science to determine that, even if the soul is supernatural. And yet the soul is supposed to be separate from our bodies, as if we could abandon these material machines and become pedestrians, or possess someone else's body and drive that around for a while, or trade in your own body when it breaks down for a new model in the case of reincarnation. So when I was into paranormal mysticism myself, I used to think that material components had to be animated by a spiritual life force, essentially what George Stahl proposed in 1708 in his medical theory of animism, the foundation of vitalism, wherein life and disease were explained by an animating spirit inhabiting every part of the body. In which case, it wouldn't just be people who have this spiritual component, but everything alive, including animals, plants, fungus, and even bacteria. In other words, if I have a soul, then so does a tree, so does an amoeba. If you have a soul, then your dog clearly does too. Like when Obi-Wan Kenobi said that the Force is an energy field created by all living things, as if life is the spiritual biosphere enveloping and animating bits of the material world. Such was my belief at the time, because I was conditioned by New Age hippie culture and fooled by our deceptive media, which talked about ectoplasm and parapsychology as if either of those were real. Of course, it turns out that this notion of living energy, the theory of vitalism, was disproved in 1828. There is no life force animating our bodies, and our current understanding of biology in the 21st century shows that there was never a need for such a thing. Our media likes to tell us that we're only using 10% of our brain, when in fact we use the full 100%. The basal portions regulate glands and bodily functions, process sensory input, enable motor control, and so on. But the number of neurons we have in the cerebral cortex, or gray matter, is the 10% of our brains that do the higher order thinking, whence our wisdom, intelligence, and personalities emerge. And this is what most people seem to envision as their soul, what makes them them. While some enlightened spiritualists associate the soul with consciousness, as if the brain can't think or know anything without the soul inside it. Believers always imagine a man behind the curtain pushing buttons and pulling levers. Consciousness is just an awareness of self or a perception of surroundings. You don't have to have human intelligence to have consciousness. You really don't even need a brain for that, as there are simple animals with no brain at all and maybe no organs either that are obviously able to perceive and react to aspects of their environment without any neurons. There is even a unicellular organism that's demonstrated a capacity for memory and reason in laboratory tests, though few people would argue that a paramecium or a slime mold has a soul. It's just that having more sensory systems and a brain to better coordinate them gives you a greater awareness and higher consciousness. So the topic that always comes up is what happens when we're not conscious. I've actually heard spiritual leaders argue that when you're asleep and your mind travels to a metaphysical plane, they believe that dreams are real and that reality is a dream. But what if you're not just asleep? What happens when the brain gets shut down and seems dead but doesn't actually die and is somehow resuscitated later? This is when a small percentage of people suffering cardiac arrest or what have you may report a near-death experience, which in the U.S. tends to be described as a period of inexplicable perception where there is no detectable brain activity, yet the patient still has at least the ability to hear and remember what was said later. How does the memory function when there is no brain activity due to a lack of oxygen? I know that leukemia patients in an oxygen-deprived state shift into an unconscious phase where the body tries to minimize all costly functions in an attempt to preserve the brain for as long as possible. If this goes on for too long, leading to brain damage, then how did your supernatural immortal soul lose the ability to think properly? If we are just spiritual passengers in these physical vehicles, then it wouldn't be possible to change our personality, propensities, or proclivities with chemical, drugs, or physical damage to the brain. Spiritual beings are separate from and entirely independent of physical or chemical effects. Yet, we know that drugs and surgery and other physical trauma can and definitely do affect who we are and how we think and feel, which all by itself should be evidence enough that there is no soul. While we don't yet know how this happens, I suspect that when the brain is extremely stressed, the mind, which is produced by the brain, goes into something like a computer safe mode, because biochemical systems like breathing and so on are controlled by the brain and yet still function even when the brain isn't showing any activity. During such times, a few of those people who report near-death experiences also report heightened perceptions that are impossible for the physical senses, like out-of-body experiences. The reason I got into transcendental meditation when I was a spiritualist is because I was fascinated by out-of-body experiences, which I took to be first-hand observation of the spiritual world. I have to prove everything scientifically. I had repeatedly achieved the unmistakable vibrations at the initial stage of that, but I was never able to transcend the flesh to see my own body from outside. And more frustrating than that was whenever I interviewed other people professing to have had these experiences under various circumstances, I found that there was no consistency between their accounts, like there certainly would be if it were really real. On the same problem in peer-reviewed studies. For example, Jeffrey Long is a medical doctor promoting Near-Death Experience Research Foundation. He published a paper to establish their reality by listing similarities, like the contrast of bright light with tunnel vision and the sensation of having found your happy place, which is not surprising given the extreme stress of an existential threat. But the paper also endorses dubious claims made in the anecdotal accounts of his patients, and it ignores important disparities that call all of the associated assumptions into question. For one thing, other studies report less consistency, with some patients having terrifying experiences too. Some patients report seeing the spirit of their dead father or something like that. But how did you recognize him if he didn't have his body? Why would a spiritual being look exactly like the body he used to operate? None of us look like our cars. Was your father's spirit naked? Of course not. So in the spirit world, everybody has ghost clothes. A number of studies have shown that the description of near-death experiences differs significantly depending on that person's religious perspective. And one illustrated experiment involved the God helmet. Significant stress to the brain can be safely duplicated without being near death, such as being flung around in a centrifuge for astronaut training. The so-called God helmet is a device that electronically stimulates the brain in subtle ways. The most common reaction people have is the idea that another unspecified but intelligent presence is in the room with them. Some thought this was something like a ghost, a demon, or what have you, or one person thought it was himself in an out-of-body experience. And Susan Blackmore, who claims to have been out of her body in the past, said that the God helmet was a similar sensation and also one of the most extraordinary experiences she's ever had, apparently better than the real thing. However, famous atheist Richard Dawkins described only feeling slightly dizzy and quite strange, but otherwise pleasantly relaxed. This is consistently what happens as anecdotal religious claims are put to the test. They are found to be subjective, implausible, and not likely genuine experiences of anything supernatural. For another example, near-death experiences reported by Hindus don't match what is typically reported by people raised in Abrahamic faiths. More importantly, Hindus report meeting their gods and so on during these experiences. You should read their accounts, they're quite different. I have a video where a Swami claimed that his consciousness ascended out of his body to meet his God, and he was even able to say how small the soul is and exactly what chakra this SIM card of the body goes in. A visiting journalist asked the Swami why it is that in near-death experience, Christians see Jesus, Buddhists see Buddha, and people of other religious faiths see whatever they expected to see. Because, Hindus don't see Jesus and Christians don't see Krishna. There is never a revelation of spirituality that the subject did not already know and believe in, which indicates that mystic visions and near-death experiences are illusions that only accentuate preconceived notions. The Swami answered that people experience whatever they believe because that's just does one God taking many forms. So that ultimately there is no truth to the idea that one must accept Jesus to be saved or that there's a hell to be saved from. That's just what you were conditioned to believe in the Christian culture. And he's able to make that judgment about y'all, but he's unable to recognize that he's only reciting what he was conditioned to believe, because Hindus see near-death experiences as proof of their reincarnation from past lives. Everyone wants to believe Yoda when he says, luminous beings are we, not this crude matter. Yoda was a muppet. We are not in any sense separable from our physical form. Everything that makes us who we are is what we are. We know we have these bodies. We don't know that there's a soul, nor could we have. Astrophysicist Sean Carroll and I argued a bit about when science can say that something is possible or impossible, and I gave him a number of absurd examples, and he would always say, well, it's highly improbable. Only when it came to the soul did Carroll finally say that we know for certain that doesn't and can't happen. He supports that with a rather impressive physics equation and an explanation of quantum field theory. In summary, he says that either some ill-defined metaphysical substance not subject to the known laws of physics interacts with atoms in our brains in ways thus far eluded by every controlled experiment in the history of science, or people hallucinate when they're nearly dead. What he's saying is that there's no possible way to remove your mind from your body because your body is the source of your mind. There is no theoretical or metaphysical model for how yourself, whatever that would be, could be in any sense you, yet not be both in and of your body. Not just some body, your body. Your life experience have built a network of synaptic connections in your brain for everything you've learned through repetition and rehearsal and discussions and so on. These are physical formations that are literally connected to everything you know or remember. If you were to suffer a stroke, your thinking would be impaired. And you might be able to rebuild those connections to become fluent again. Most people never recover. But even if you could, that still proves that you were dependent on that cerebral mesh in the first place. Philosopher Daniel Dennett says that the mind is an emergent aspect of the body, not just one part of the brain, but the whole brain collectively, and really the rest of the body too. Even your endocrine system influences some portion of who and what you are, including your desires and aspects of your sexuality. Even if you could remove your mind and place it in someone else's body, it wouldn't be you anymore. Because your mind is not just data, and you're not just the things you know or remember. The neural pathways in that other brain would literally change your mind, forcing you to think differently. The new arms and legs would have different skills and talents than your old body did, and that other endocrine system would alter many of your preferences and your emotions, making you someone else. You wouldn't even recognize yourself anymore because you wouldn't be you anymore. You would be that other body. I don't know how I managed to get through that with all the pandemonium of the dogs going crazy around me. That's just what happens here.
All right, thank you, Aaron. Thank you, Aaron, for that opening statement. Thank you both for your opening statements. All right, so now we're going to go ahead and go to a rebuttal round. Each person get 5 minutes to rebut their opponent. Starting with Mr. Eric Hernandez, you have 5 minutes for rebuttal.
Thanks. Yeah, all of that was irrelevant to whether or not the soul exists. I'm a bit surprised. One thing, so I don't even know if I'll use 5 minutes. I might. So he said that the topic was dropped from what it was initially. No, it wasn't dropped because it was never the topic in the first place. Marlon presented a topic to both of us, and I'm guessing you replied first and said, yes, you're willing to do that. And I said, actually, I'd like to change it to this topic because I wanted Aaron to have to bear a burden of proof and not just say I'm not convinced. And I know that he's going to want to, I'll just leave it at that. So yeah, it was never dropped. It was just never the topic to begin with. So given the topic that we have now, it's Aaron's job to show why there is no soul and give a case for it. All I heard was a bunch of assertions and empty claims. I didn't hear any evidence behind that, but maybe we can get into that with the cross-examination. So he bears a burden of proof to show something. He said he's looking for empirical evidence. We're gonna, I'm sure, get into that later because I'm curious to what empirical evidence there is that the brain thinks and the brain knows things, like he asserted. He mentioned Sean Carroll. Sean Carroll's not an expert in the philosophy of mind, nor is that his field. He can talk about that, but that's not telling me what Sean Carroll thinks would be like me quoting to you what a street preacher is saying and showing, hey, look at the street preacher. Here's why he says evolution is false. And I know you would laugh at that. So quoting Sean Carroll to me regarding philosophy of mind would be like me quoting a street preacher to you regarding evolution. He talked about Dennett. Dennett actually denies consciousness. Him and John Searle, both atheist philosophers, both atheist philosophers of mind. John Searle, I think, really showed him where he was wrong. But Dennett denies consciousness and appeals to some type of eliminative behaviorism, which is a type of physicalism. Arn didn't tell us which of the 5 versions of physicalism he holds to, which is a little bit odd to leave out in a debate on the soul. He didn't provide a case for why there can be no soul or what his position is on the soul, other than, again, just mere assertions. He says that if you were put in another body, you would think differently, and it would change your emotions and your preferences, and that would make you literally a different person. Interesting. So he seems to concede my point that you're not one person from one moment to the next. So I'm wondering, at what point does he change and become literally a different person? Is Arn a different person than what he was yesterday because he now has a different set of beliefs and thoughts and memories? Is he literally a different person than when he was 5? So he's not the same person that developed and grew. No, it was literally someone different. That's quite strange, but I'll let Aaron defend and talk about that maybe when we get into some cross-examination. There really wasn't much for me to talk about. He talked about, ghost hunters and some other things that have absolutely nothing to do with whether or not the soul exists, anything with regards to what I said. So I guess it still stands, and I know that, and I want to be fair, that was his opening statement. It wasn't a rebuttal to mine, so I'm not trying to say that. I am interested in hearing what he's going to say for a rebuttal, but again, it was largely irrelevant. And I'm curious how much he prepared for this debate, because I was hoping to hear some arguments against it. And even though I believe in the soul, I can give plenty of arguments why people think or would support physicalism, and I can give you the different 5 versions of physicalism, but I heard none of that from Arn. I just, again, heard a lot of assertions. Sean Carroll and Daniel Dennett were the only 2 people that I can think of that he mentioned. I mentioned 4 or 5 philosophers, most of them atheists. So, yeah, there's not really much for me to respond to there. I'll concede the rest of my time.
All right, thank you, Eric. All right, Arn, you're up for your 5 minutes.
Yeah, when Eric opened right away, my first thoughts as he started getting into this was I thought there was going to be some substance, and literally everything he said was irrelevant to the point. I did not make any assertions. All I did was give data and what we should expect and predict from experiments and so forth if there was a soul, and the evidence, not assertions, that stand against there being a soul. And it doesn't matter that Sean Carroll's name is Sean Carroll or what his position is. It was the reason why he made the argument. It was the value of the argument because it makes sense and it is sound. Now, as far as Daniel Dennett and Patricia Churchland described consciousness as the ebb and flow of neurons inside a healthy human brain, meaning that the mind really does emanate from and is generated by the brain. And this is according to Dennett, who is of course a cognitive scientist specializing in the philosophy of mind. So I'm surprised if he's completely changed his position since then. Then I'm interested in how Eric has automatically dismissed the idea that all inconclusive data or all data is going to be inconclusive by a definitional fiat. But again, I had the same impression of Eric's argument that he had of mine. I saw everything he said as being irrelevant. He's trying to weigh into philosophy. He said that a soul is immaterial substance, which is a contradiction in itself. The words don't even make sense together, right? There would be a way to verify if we actually had a soul. There's lots of different ways we could do that. We can't just say that it's mystical, magical, whimsical, and you can't touch it. Don't look into the man behind the curtain. There's a curtain. We can look behind it. It's that simple. To challenge physicalism, the physicalism is the mutually held idea that there is a physical reality, and minus the empty assertion that there's some alternate reality on top of that. So we both accept that the one that we really have. If Eric wants to propose that that physicalism is not true, well, then what he has to do is he has to show that there's also this alternate reality on top of that, or in addition to that, and he didn't. He does his special definitions that we have something that's mystical and belief and we can't ever touch it, and science is prohibited from even thinking about this, which I think is invalid. Also, they didn't mention about free will. There was a number of interesting things. I'm not sure about free will myself. I understand that there's still some arguing about that, but I always thought that if you, I may not have free will. I don't think that I necessarily do, but I know that for a Christian who believes that there's a being who foretold our existence in the future, I know that you can't have free will. There's places throughout the Bible where the conditions set do not allow free will. So I don't even understand why Christians argue for that point. It's obvious they can't have it. Not just that they don't, but they can't, logically. And one other question is, if men, well, I'll save that for the question and answer period. And I can see the rest.
All right. Thank you both for those rebuttals. All right, so now we transition to a cross-examination round. So once again, it's a 50-minute cross-examination. The first 30 minutes, each person gets 15 minutes. Final 20 minutes, each person gets 10 minutes to ask questions. All right, starting with you, Mr. Eric. You have 15 minutes to cross-examine on.
Thanks. So you're saying that consciousness is generated by the brain, is that right?
Not just by the brain. That consciousness exists below the brain. It's just when you have a brain, you have more sensory apparatus, you have more cognitive functions, you have a higher awareness, a higher consciousness, or more awareness and a higher consciousness. But I mean, or even organisms that don't have a brain still have consciousness.
So you can have consciousness without a brain?
Yes.
Interesting. Okay, so then you shouldn't have no problem with belief in God being an unembodied mind. Can you describe to me what a pain is in purely physical terms?
What is?
What is a pain? Which is it's a state of consciousness, it's a sensation. Yeah, describe pain in purely physical terms.
PAIN. Right? When it hurts? Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
That's one of your sensory apparatus. That's one of the simple ones. Like I mentioned one of these experiments that wasn't actually an experiment, was an observation that fit this. Those paramecium don't have any neurons at all, and yet they can detect the chemical signature of an enveloping amoeba, and it causes a fight or flight response with panic mode where it sets in and takes off. Now, from natural selection, anything that has a protective system.
Can you tell me what a pain is?
That's what I'm doing. That's what you're interrupting. So you have it's a sensory apparatus that lets you know that you are in danger, that damage is being done, so that you can react to that. I'll just simplify it.
Okay, so you're describing pain behavior, but that's not pain. Because I can have pain behavior without pain. Pain behavior isn't what makes a pain a pain. What makes a pain a pain?
The very thing that I just said. It is the response to damage being done. It is the way you are being alerted to that damage being done. We perceive that as pain.
So again, you're doing what Dent does. You're giving a behavioralist account, but that doesn't describe what pain is. How do you know you're in pain?
May as well just ask me what a color is. Again, it is our perception.
Can you describe that in a physical term? What is a pain? Is a pain in the brain?
Would you like to repeat the explanation that I already gave that answers the question you're asking again?
No, because that didn't answer the question. Is pain in the brain? Is a thought in the brain?
Once again, since we have this is being evident in organisms that don't have a brain, then no, it's not just in the brain. Though in us, it's centralized in the brain. In organisms that don't have a brain or even a neural network, it has to go somewhere else, or it's body-wide.
Where's a thought?
Where is a thought? As I said, the higher order thinking, what we would recognize as thoughts, is in the cerebral cortex, the 10% of our brain where our neurons are.
So you said consciousness is it's a function, it's something the brain does. How can a function be true or false?
What?
How can a function be true or false?
Does it function? Yes. Equals true?
No.
No equals false?
How can a function be true or false? So when I flush my toilet, that's a function, but that's not true or false.
Okay.
So how can a thought be a brain function? If a thought can be true or false, then it's a property of a thought to be true or false. It's not a property of a function to be true or false. If you're going to say a thought is something physical in the brain, it's going to have to share those physical properties.
So you're saying if you can think something and be wrong, that means what?
That it's not a physical state or function.
Okay, so you flush your toilet. How is flushing your toilet true or false?
Well, that's my point. It's not. Which would mean that
Okay.
consciousness is not reducible nor identical to the brain, or a function of the brain.
Okay, so if the flushing your toilet cannot be true or false, then did you? I don't understand what is even the point of the question.
Okay,
Does that mean your
so
toilet
this is
doesn't exist? Is that what you're saying?
so this
Is your toilet
well,
a flush?
Well, I'm
toilet is
asking the
not a
questions here.
flush,
So,
then-
well,
then-
I'm asking the questions. So this is odd that you come to debate on consciousness and the soul, or the soul, which deals with consciousness, and you're not familiar with these types of categories or terminology. So, as I mentioned in my argument, which was evidence, deductive logic is evidence, showing that if the mind is reducible or identical to the brain, they're going to share the same properties. If they don't share the same properties, they're not the same thing. For you to say that consciousness is physical, you're going to have to show me that all the properties of the mind are identical or reducible to something physical like the brain. I haven't heard
And I
that.
think I did
Can you do that? I'm sorry?
But I think I already did that.
How'd you do that?
When you asked me what a pain is, and I explained what a pain is, and you said I didn't explain what a pain is, even though I did, and then you said that your pain cannot be true or false, which means flushing the toilet cannot be true or false. I don't understand what you're trying
those
to
are two
do.
different. Well, I can see that. No, so what you described was what someone does when they're in pain, but describing pain behavior did not describe pain. There was an intrinsic qualia to pain itself.
Right, it's how we perceive the damage being done through our sensory nerve. That is the answer. That is what a pain is. It's the indication of damage that we perceive through our receptors. Literally, that's
what
what it
you're
is.
It's okay, it's perceived damage. So perception, is that something physical?
Yes.
How does a brain function perceive?
Well, I'm not a neurologist. I wouldn't be able to tell you exactly how these neurons affect, or the network of sensory receptors and how they're interconnected. But I know that if you damage something in the body, then the body does send a signal, and the signal is received and interpreted as pain. Pain is the perception of that damage being done. And yes, it's physical.
I think Eric dropped out. Let me see if I can get him back. All right, Eric, we left off. You had about 7.5 minutes left. So we can continue there and progress forward.
All right. Okay. Yeah. So, like I was saying, you described pain behavior, didn't describe pain. We're talking about thoughts. Now, if property of being a thought can be true or false, but no part or function of my brain is true or false, and that alone would show that they're not the same thing. Now, do you agree or disagree with that?
I disagree, of course. Yeah, and I didn't describe the pain response. I described the pain. That the pain is defined as that sensory input that we perceive that way. That is what is.
So, can you have pain behavior without being in pain?
I didn't explain how we respond to that. I said that is, we perceive this input. The pain is the indicator that damage is being done. It's,
And the indicator, is it not that there's a felt quality to what pain is?
Yeah.
Okay, that's qualia, which is something Dennett denies, and which is something that's not physical.
Okay. How is it not? When you touch something, obviously that's physical. You touch something forcibly, you
Right.
alert
So-
these nerve cells would then respond to send this chemical signal. Which chemical is physical, and
Right. So-
you react. You realize that there's a pain sensation. All of this is entirely physical. What's not physical about that?
So, well, the pain itself is not physical. There may be inputs and outputs that are physical
What
that may
about
cause
pain
something,
is
but doesn't
not
mean the pain
physical?
itself. Well, the very pain
What
itself.
about pain is
The very
the
felt
very pain
the qualia. Are you familiar with qualia?
Yeah, everything we
familiar with
just
qualia?
described, everything that pain is physical. So what's not
Okay.
physical about?
Well, you can't describe pain in a physical sense. Okay, so can you have pain behavior without actually being in
You
pain?
can only describe pain in a physical sense.
which you haven't done. You talked about, you said there's a perception.
Okay. Okay.
You said there's a perception. What are you perceiving? You're perceiving pain. Now, you talked about which something I already mentioned in my opening about cause and effect relationships. Just because you can show cause and effect relationships doesn't mean it's something physical. If fire causes smoke, it doesn't mean that fire is smoke. Just because there's something that I can detune in my guitar, it affects the way I play the music, doesn't mean the music is inside my guitar, that the note C is inside my guitar. So I don't know why you think it would be relevant to bring up cause and effect relationship to show that consciousness is not physical. I mean, that to show or to try to indicate that consciousness is physical.
Well, I thought we were having a different debate. I thought the purpose of the debate tonight was that we were supposed to say whether there or not there is a soul, in which case you were supposed to present some reason to believe that there is a soul. And having that you didn't do that, I think my work is done here. I'm confused. Why are we continuing?
I don't think you've done any work. So let's go to free will, because you mentioned that. So you said you don't think you have free will. Is that right?
I'm not certain about that.
Okay, so it seems like you're trying to make a rational decision, which is an indication that you're free to come to that decision in the first place, are you not?
Oh, it would seem so. Yeah. I mean, we certainly have to treat people as if they have free will. I mean, the legal system wouldn't work if we didn't. But, you know, from a philosophical standpoint, I understand that the reasons that I make the decisions that I do are largely based on my past experience. And you can predict, if you know somebody well enough, the decision that they're going to make in a given situation, even if it's the wrong decision, that they're going to make that decision because that's what their indications are. That's
yeah, right. Okay, so whether or not free will exists, if you're so you don't believe there's a soul, you believe you're something just physical, is that right?
Yeah.
Okay, then as I argued, you can't have free will because every action, thought, and belief is causally determined by prior external factors beyond yourself. So you can't have free will if there's no soul, which means that you're very believed to be an atheist, and so you're very believed to be an atheist, and so your very belief to be an atheist and your belief to not believe in the soul was not a free decision that you came to make. It wasn't even a rational decision because there was no free will. So your beliefs are no more rational than the religious person on the street, you know, saying that the world is flat and that the earth is young.
Except that I have reasons to hold the position that I do, which is why I hold the position that I do.
That
whereas
reasons that you were causally
have free will either, because you can't have free will because you have
reasons that you were causally determined. Reasons that you were causally determined to believe, right? You were not free to believe that you have no free will. You did not freely believe that, right?
I think you're pushing free will beyond where it needs to be. I can change my mind when given evidence that I'm incorrect, as has happened before. That's what we should do. That's what makes us honest. But there is some point when you realize that how open you are to this, or whether you're inclined to make a given decision, really is based on your past experiences and who you are, how you were raised, and so forth, and a lot of other things. But it doesn't mean that I'm constrained or prohibited from making the right decisions or from being rational in them.
So, well, let me ask it this way: did you really kind of believe that there's no free will?
The rationality actually has no relevance in this argument.
Did you really come to believe that you have no free will?
I don't want to have to repeat the same explanations over and over again. So suffice it to say that, yes, I freely came to believe that I have no free will, because I'm not conflating these things the way you evidently are.
Well, you can ask me, I don't know how I'm conflating that, but okay, so you freely came to believe you have no free will. And if that's the case, if you do have some type of free will and intellectual integrity, and you can ask me that when it's your turn, intellectual integrity or more responsibility, if you have these things, then you have to have something like a soul. Otherwise, the law of causal closure would be true, and every physical event would have a physical cause.
Why would you have to have a soul?
Because all you have... So I guess you didn't follow the... So I guess you didn't follow the argument. Given the law of causal closure, every physical event must have a physical cause. Your brain firing, which is what you're going to say, all thoughts, beliefs, and actions are nothing but neurons firing, that's going to be caused by some prior physical event.
I didn't actually. I said many times very explicitly that it's more basal than that.
It's something physical.
It is.
Right? Right. Which is going to be necessarily caused by some...
When a physical being has all these indications that it makes the decisions that it does because of its training or conditioning or whatever might be the effect, still has the ability to make a rational decision given evidence to do so.
Minions have spawned.
It's causally determined by external factors beyond its control. So let me ask you about this.
Which
I
still allows
think I know the
you-
answer to this.
allows
So
you
it
to
might
make a
turn.
rational decision
So
given the
so
reason to do so.
so okay. Thank you. So I'm sure you would agree with this, but I want to get this clear. So I know you wouldn't believe something like men are more valuable or more persons than women, correct?
No, that was one I wanted to ask you about, because I did not catch what your assertion was with that. When you said if men and women
Right.
are equal, the soul cannot exist. What?
All right, that's time.
Yeah, no, that's not.
That's
not.
time right there. All right, Aaron.
All right.
It is now your 15-minute opportunity to cross-examine here.
Yeah, I can tell you I'm not going to need 15 minutes, but we'll just start with that first one. If men and women are equal, then physicalism can't be true. And again, physicalism is, I assume that you and I both accept there is a physical world. So physicalism is what you and I both accept, minus the other thing that you were supposed to come up with and show that you didn't. So, still waiting on that. But you said that if men and women are equal, then physicalism can't be true, meaning that there's some supernatural thing. Why?
Yeah, so I didn't say that. I don't know where in the world you got that. The point was actually the opposite. If men and women,
I don't know if you thought there were dogs going crazy behind me, and then it was a little difficult to catch everything, I admit. So what did you say?
right. So what I did say was that, so being a person, the property of being a person, I would argue is a non-degree property. It's an all or nothing kind of thing. Now, if there's no soul, you're going to have to ground this in something physical like the brain and body, which does fluctuate and can come in percentages or degrees. So if all you are is a physical brain and body, then being a person would in principle be a degree property that can fluctuate, which means someone who has more mass and matter would either matter more or have more value or be more persons than someone who has less mass or matter. Given that men are typically larger than women, if physicalism is true, then you have more mass and matter, which would indicate more personhood and value. But I know you wouldn't agree with that, so you would have to reject physicalism. You also mischaracterized physicalism.
Wait, how is it really? How was that ridiculous argument? I mean, that's complete non sequitur. How did you then throw in the unrelated aspect of physicalism?
Okay, so this is odd. You don't know what physicalism means. These are philosophical terms. It's a philosophical topic.
Yep.
It's philosophy of mind. And physicalism is a view that human beings are purely physical objects composed of purely physical properties and parts. That's the definition of physicalism.
I understood that.
Okay, so you said we agree on that. We don't agree on that.
Well, we both agree that there is a physical universe, yes?
Yeah, but you can't equate. You're equivocating, saying physicalism and equating that with physical stuff.
Tell me again what physicalism is. It's the belief that we have only the physical world. Is that right?
It is a position regarding the existence and nature of human beings, that human beings are purely physical properties and parts.
So it is what I just said. It is that we have only the physical world. So we both accept that there is the physical world, and you want to assert that there is some other.
No. We don't. It's the view that is all there is to human beings. We don't both accept that. I believe in the soul.
Right.
Why would you say that I would accept
We
that?
both accept that there's a physical universe, right? Right.
Physicalism is a regard of human persons, not the universe.
And is that
That'd
a
be
yes
more like
or is that a
naturalism
no?
or materialism.
Okay, is that a yes or is that a no? Do we both accept that there's a physical universe?
Yes, that's not physicalism.
Okay, then once again, the physicalism is the belief that you have this aspect of humanity is purely physical and that there is no soul to it, right? So then the purpose then of this debate is for you to present a reason to believe that there is this additional component to what we know we already are. And so I've been waiting for you to do that.
Know that.
And what you gave
Well, okay, so I mean,
is neither true or false.
well, that's to show the non-identity of so there were 2 points I made. Consciousness is not physical, and I am more than a brain and body. I'm assuming you disagree with both of those. Is that correct?
Of course.
Okay, so if consciousness is physical, you're going to have to demonstrate. that every mental state and property is identical to every physical state and property. But if I can show, which I have, that there are mental states and properties that are not reducible or identical to any physical states and properties, it would show that
When did that
consciousness is not physical. If
Maybe dogs were making noise from the background, but I didn't catch that part. When did you do that?
there are things, there are things true of. So okay, you have mental states and properties that are not identical to anything physical. So something physical is something that can be described purely in the language of chemistry and physics. You cannot do that with conscious states.
I mean, like
when you look,
an immaterial substance. Where the two
so
words
that's
mean
even
opposite
another thing
things?
that's odd. It's almost embarrassing, because for you to say that is for you to show that you don't know even the history of that term substance. It was first used by philosophers, and then science got a hold of it later. So a substance is not something necessarily tied to science and something physical. It has a rich history of it, and for something to be a substance, there's a certain views of substance, like identity through change, indivisibility, things of that nature.
Okay, and immaterial means?
Not physical, not material.
So, not a non-physical substance. So immaterial means non-physical. What does non-physical mean?
Yeah, something that's going to take more than the language of chemistry and physics to describe.
Okay.
Having properties beyond the physical.
So far as I know, nobody's ever defined what the hell this is. I mean, it's always something nebulous that you can never touch it. But my understanding is that a soul...
Why would you be able to touch something non-physical?
Right. I wouldn't assume such a thing. I wish you wouldn't imply that I had.
You just said it's something you can't touch. Well, of course.
Right. Of course. So I obviously didn't assume you could touch it. But your argument with the soul is that we have this thing that can't touch the physical universe, or that maybe it can touch the physical universe. I don't know, because we never got a definition from you. So somehow this mystical, ghostly, whatever it is that remains undefined, exists inside us and apparently drives our bodies around. I mean, are we on the right track? I mean, do we need to define what a soul is before we argue about it?
Well, I did. I mean, I'm almost tempted to ask if you were paying attention to my opening. I did define what a soul was. I even had a slide
You
for
said
it.
a material substance.
That contains consciousness and animates the body.
Yeah, so basically it's the man behind the curtain pushing buttons and throwing levers rather than the complex functions of the brain and biochemistry. It always has to boil down to the man behind the curtain in some way. But
because a brain function...
you're really just pushing the argument. You're pushing the argument back because what causes the soul to be able to think? If you discount that the brain can think, even when we can show how the brain actually does think, then you want to say that the soul is doing the thinking for the brain. Well, how does the soul do the thinking?
Okay, hold on. So you're saying that the brain can think. So I have no idea how we would show the brain thinks. So this gets into already something I said about first-person private access. I know there's a lot to go through, but if you're going to be doing a debate on this and you're not coming prepared to even at least have the basic terminology and knowledge of the arguments for the soul, then it's going to be really hard to kind of have a good discussion if I'm going to keep having to explain certain terminologies and concepts. So first-person private access...
Just help me out with this then. When did you give a reason to believe that a soul exists? How did you phrase that?
So the two basic points, and I gave arguments for each of those. The non-identity, the non-identity regarding Leibniz's law of the indiscernibility of identicals.
Your toilet flushing is neither true nor false.
Out of all that, the only thing you heard was toilet flushing. Really?
Yeah. Yeah. So what I gave is, if you want to propose that there is actually a body, or that, excuse me, that there's some kind of mystical, as yet still undefined something or other. And what I meant when I said when you can't touch it, you can't even describe it, you can't even define it, right? That's supposed to be this nebulous whatever that's inside of us in some way, or however you want to describe it. I don't know, because I'm coming up with all the explanations and definitions here. That's supposed to be driving our bodies. Well, then there would be certain things we would expect of this immaterial thinker that's thinking where the brain doesn't think, even though it looks like the brain is thinking. And we know that we can damage the brain and change how it thinks, and that doesn't make sense. If the brain isn't thinking, then how did we stop the thinking when we damaged the brain?
Well, the same way, just like the note C is not inside a guitar, if you detune it or pop strings, you're not going to be able to play the note C. It's not a hard concept.
Okay. But if we're talking about a soul being inside a body, then would it be fair to do an analogy where you're driving a car? Does that make sense? Does that work at all? Your perspective
Yeah.
of having a soul in here? Okay. So the soul, the car loses a headlight and you're suddenly blind. I mean, what happens if what is it about the car? The car receives damage, and then the immortal soul, which is completely independent of that, is somehow damaged in the same way. Does that make sense to you?
So, I get what you're saying, if that's what you mean. So, I didn't argue about the soul being immortal. That wasn't part of my argument. But you're on the right track in that there is a cause and effect, a correlation between that. But correlations are not explanations, as atheist philosophers like
soul
Kim would
can
argue.
be damaged?
So what can be damaged is the instrument the soul uses. I cannot damage the note C, but I can damage a guitar and a piano. I can damage the keys associated and correlated with
The
it.
brain doesn't think, but if you have a stroke, as I mentioned in my presentation, that impairs the ability to understand things, even though there's a soul that is the one doing the real thinking, according to you. Suddenly the soul can't think. Well, why is that? The soul is independent of that. The soul didn't get a stroke, the body did. And if the brain isn't
When did I
doing
say
the
the
thinking,
soul-
then it's irrelevant if it had a stroke or not.
No. So, yeah, I never said the soul is independent of the body. I'm a substance dualist, and there's a deep integration for it, and I hold to a Traducian view of the soul, which I don't even want to open up that can of worms. But it's...
We're very hot up the description of physicalism, meaning that that physicalism is that humanity is only this thing, and then you mentioned that the soul is independent of that it's completely separate in
I
some
never said-
respect. That it's one
never said the
physical and
soul-
one immaterial.
I said it's not identical or reducible to. Those are
Okay,
technical
so the soul
metaphysical
cannot
terms.
leave the body then.
Says who?
I'm asking you. You just said
I think
the
it
soul
can,
cannot
but that
leave the
wasn't.
body.
I think. I never.
You said the soul
I think
cannot
it
be
can, but that
independent
wasn't part of my. I
Well, how
think
can
it
the soul
can, but
be-
I never. That wasn't part of.
The soul can be independent of the body.
I think the soul can exist disembodied. Yes.
Okay, can the soul go on to another body?
I think it's metaphysically possible.
How do we know how do we know if anything is metaphysically possible?
Ah, very nice.
How do we determine?
So,
Can you give me an example of something that is metaphysically impossible?
metaphysically impossible? Yeah, the number 2 being the color purple or weighing 5 pounds.
Okay, so we have essentially the same logic in metaphysics then.
I don't understand the question.
Okay, so you said it was metaphysically possible. How do you determine whether something is metaphysically possible?
Oh, gotcha. Right. So first, there can't be a logical contradiction to it. It has to be, in some sense, actualizable. It can't be a category fallacy, kind of you asking for scientific empirical evidence for a non-physical,
Then why
immaterial
add
thing.
the adjective metaphysical?
I'm sorry?
If the way that you determine whether something is metaphysically possible is the same way that I would determine whether something is physically possible or logically possible, then why add the adjective metaphysical?
Right. So there are some things that are logically possible that wouldn't be metaphysically possible because logically possible is a lower bar than metaphysically possible or actualizable. So, for example, it's in technically metaphysically possible for the prime minister to be a prime number because there's no blatant, explicit logical contradiction. But I would say it's metaphysically impossible for that to be the case.
But neither of us are arguing for these kind of impossibilities. This debate comes down to we both accept that there are physical beings, and you want to say that there's another aspect to it. And I'm looking for the reason that we should believe that there's another aspect to it. What I presented is things that would be inconsistent with that, where we show that the body can possess this ability. Even without a brain, the body can possess this ability.
How did you show that?
When I talked about the paramecium and the slime mold that demonstrated reason and memory in laboratory tests, even though they're unicellular organisms without any neurons.
Yeah, but so would have to. So you're saying you can. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I'm saying that what we have is a consistency, right? We know that there's no aspect of the body that needs a soul to drive it. The body's fully functioning all on its own without a soul. the brain has these abilities, and we know that we can impair those abilities. We know we can improve these abilities. We can certainly significantly change them in a number of ways. So where is there an indication then that the soul is even there or necessary? When the brain has a stroke, the soul somehow loses the ability to think. That's inconsistent. Or when you improve a medical condition, when you have the split brain thing, and you're unable to feel what's in your left hand because you're reading from the right brain and you're not looking at it, you're just going by sensory. Why would that? A soul would not have that dysfunction, right?
So no. So for some reason, I'm wondering if you understood any of my arguments that I gave. You keep saying I didn't present anything. I did present it. You haven't interacted with him. You just made some assertions.
I'm just a terribly stupid person. That's my whole problem. I'm completely beneath normal cognizance. But help me out here. When did you give a reason to believe that there's a soul? Or when did you address any of the things that I said about what we should expect to be consistent if there was a soul that aren't consistent?
Okay, so
the out of body experiences and so forth. I mean, that's what I really thought. What's that?
Well, I said, well, you asked me a question. Are you going to another question? The non-identity of conscious mental states versus any physical brain states. If you have free will, if you are indivisible as a person, if you remain the same through change, then you have to be more than something physical. Now, even within my opening, I argued that it would be expected for there to be cause and dependent relationships while the soul's embodied, but it doesn't mean that they're the same thing. You cannot point to a cause and effect and then somehow say that therefore that proves identity. In philosophy, something is identical to something else. It means it's literally the same thing as. Showing cause and effect or dependence doesn't mean it's literally the same thing.
All right, that's time.
I'm sorry?
True or false?
That's time right there. All right, so now, Eric, you have 10 minutes to cross-examine Arn.
How do you know the brain thinks?
Again, since I'm not a neurologist myself, I have to trust what the experts say. Every indication is that if you become if you get drunk or inebriated on some drug, then you have enhanced your ability or impaired your ability to make decisions and so forth. When you go without sleep, you lack the ability to concentrate. There are a number of chemicals that will cause you to be unable to concentrate. There's a number of physical conditions. Heat exhaustion, for example, can cause people to lose the ability to focus. These are all indications that the brain is connected to physical reality and has physical external components that impose upon it to impair its ability to think, whereas a soul would be independent of that.
So you think because there's cause and effect relationships, it shows that consciousness is in the brain. Your thoughts are in the brain, that your brain thinks.
We do have indications that consciousness is in the brain as well as the rest of the body, as I said, not just in the brain.
Was that a yes?
Do I believe we have physical aspects that are affecting?
No,
yes, there are physical effects on the brain's ability to think or the body.
Do you believe that shows that consciousness is physical or in the brain?
Yes.
Okay, so by popping guitar strings and messing up piano keys, that shows the note. That shows the note C is inside the piano. If I open that bad boy up, I can pull the note C out. It was a serious question. By your line of logic, you should say yes.
Yeah,
in other words, if you think that cause and effect shows that something's in the other, then showing a cause and effect relationship with an instrument, you would have to, if you're going to be consistent logically, you're going to have to say the note C, yes, is in the guitar.
Why?
Because as I asked you the question, I don't know how you're not tracking here. I'm sorry?
What is a note C?
Well, it's my turn to ask questions, but it's a certain sound. It's something that you experience in the mind.
And response. You're not describing what it is.
No, see, it's a certain pitch. It's not something physical, I'd even say, because I can have that in my mind without it being played in.
The sound vibration.
That's one way it's exhibited. It's when can you hear a song in your Can you hear a song in your mind?
Yeah.
And what vibrations are going on there?
I'm doing a different kind of a data relay. It's much like when you play something on your computer. It's obviously not twanging any chords there.
Okay, so then it's not necessarily just a vibration in the air. Thank you. Okay, so your line of
also not
logic
in
was that
color.
showing your line of logic was showing that a cause and effect relationship somehow proved that that was inside, that the consciousness was in the brain. And yet you're not going to accept that when it comes to the note C or guitar or piano. Or take a CD. You don't think the music is inside the CD, do you?
Of course I do. It's data.
The music is inside the CD. It's inside.
But the note C, it depends on what we're defining. The note C is not in the guitar. The note C is the vibration of the string, the reactions through the air. Now, it can be interpreted other ways by other devices and repeated in other ways by other devices.
Okay, so then how is that so hard to understand the concept that you can have a soul that's embodied, and yet if you mess with the brain, you're going to affect the way the soul interacts?
Because we get back to the same point, was what is the value or indication that there is a soul in the first place? So the brain has all these. We know the physical effects happen to the brain, right? Okay, yeah, we've got to establish all that. Where's the soul?
That's a question of a physical thing. It's like saying, "Where's the number 2?"
Okay. What should we expect if somebody has a soul or we don't have a soul? How can we? What would be the expected conditions from brain damage or what have you?
We should expect cause and effect relationships, just like if I mess a guitar up or scratch a CD, it's going to affect the way the thing operates.
Whether there is a soul or not a soul, it's exactly the same circumstances either way.
That's a great question. So even though it's my turn to ask questions, but I don't mind the more open dialogue, so I'm fine with that. I think it makes for better conversation. So you can have, so there's something called P-zombies. It's another philosophical concept that you can have interactions just like we're having, and yet you are conscious, because you can have, so for example, well, let me ask you this way. Do you think a computer is conscious?
Not yet, no.
Why not?
Well, one is that, as I described, consciousness is a perception of self and an awareness of surroundings. And computers
and how
don't
do you know
have,
that's not?
Because
How do you
computers
know?
don't have. Just keep asking the question. I can try to answer it.
No, there might have been a lag. Go ahead.
Okay. I think there might have been. Computers don't have any, besides receiving power and data input from the internet, they don't have any information about their surroundings. My computer has no way of knowing what kind of a desk or room or surroundings it's in. There's no possible perception there, not even chemical.
But could you not? Well, I would still be curious how you would know that. But could I program a computer that when it has, it could exhibit certain kinds of outputs, like perceived danger, if you will?
Yes.
Oh, so then, according to what you said earlier, then a computer would be in pain, which would be a conscious state.
If you equip it with pain receptors and get it to have capacity to understand that. My computer doesn't have any of that. My computer has no consciousness. It is what the reason that I said not yet is that I'm saying that it is potential that a computer could have consciousness.
When would you know?
How
do you know? How do you know someone else is conscious?
How do I know if someone else is conscious? Are we going to drop right into questioning the whole of reality and assuming that there are no mind-independent reality and I'm just everybody's a figment of my imagination? Okay, I just want to make sure we don't.
Assuming that. No,
I'm
you
not
have to stop
assuming.
assuming every time someone asks those kind of questions that it's
not an assumption.
Okay.
So how do I know someone else is conscious?
Mm-hmm.
Do they exhibit signs of consciousness? I try not to look at everything
behavior, right?
I try not to look at everything in terms of absolutes. Consciousness itself is an emergent aspect. There are degrees of it, many of them, and it's not like Chalmers, I think it was, who came up with the false dichotomy that consciousness is something that you don't have until you have so many neurons, and then when you cross that certain threshold, you suddenly have consciousness, like it's a light switch. We know that it's not that way. So That's my problem with the hard problem, is that we know that consciousness doesn't work that way, that there are degrees of it, and it's not like a sudden on and off thing. You either have it or you don't.
Right. No, I would agree with that, and that's why I wouldn't. I don't know how you can possibly say that consciousness emerges from something physical like
You're
matter.
asking-
That's
Well, we did just describe this. If you have a computer that has sensory apparatus, you have like a Roomba, for example, has some perception of its outside environment, but it doesn't have the capacity to understand its own role in it. Now, you program that in, right? It knows that it needs to steer or whatever, but it doesn't really understand that. There are ways for it to understand that. There are ways that even cockroaches and such, with the very simple systems that they have, when you flip on the kitchen light, they understand that they're exposed and they have to run for their lives. There are programs that could be put into a system, and I hope they don't ever do this. I know they will, but I would rather that they not, wherein computers can have this degree of consciousness, where they're going to be aware of where they are and of themselves in that environment.
so we can agree we don't want Skynet. Yeah.
Yeah, it's one of the things that it hugely frustrates me. I know how curious people are, and they want to know what they can do, but we are not that smart. We're so stupid a species that we dared call ourselves Homo sapiens sapiens, the height of arrogance. And then we're going to turn around and build something that is smarter than we are by orders of magnitude, but doesn't have any of our humanity.
So, yeah, and I'm enjoying the discussion, by the way. So, a Roomba is in some sense aware of its surroundings, and you said earlier that would be qualities of consciousness, but then I don't think you think a Roomba is conscious, do you?
Again, there's a degrees. I wouldn't have thought that a paramecium was conscious until it was able to detect that it's being engulfed and has to flee. Now, there's no, well, there are some basic systems that are built into a Roomba. I mean, it does detect when it's been trapped or whatever and calls for help. I mean, that does happen. But does it know where it is? Does a paramecium know where it is? Does a slime mold know where it is? It's not a yes or no question. There's a degree to which it does, and it may be very small. Did we lose Eric again?
I think we did lose Eric again. Let me see. I think his Wi-Fi might have dipped out again. Let me see if I can get him back real quick.
Yeah, are we ready for audience questions?
There's a 10-minute cross-examination for you, and then we'll go to the closing and then audience.
Okay.
Let me see if he... Oh, there he goes. He's back now.
Yep, he's back.
I don't know what it might, in a second time it's gone out.
Yeah, that was the end of your 10 minutes right there. So, Arn, you have 10 minutes to cross-examine Eric.
Yeah, I think I've already done mine, really.
Okay.
I'll take a quick load of my looks at, or my notes, and I just have the same questions still, so I'm just going to leave it.
All right, sounds good. Sounds good. All right, so we're going to transition to closing statements. Eric, you're up for closing, man.
How long is closing? Is it 5 minutes?
10 minutes. All right, if you conclude in 5 minutes, that's fine, but the max 10 minutes.
Yeah, no, I won't need too long. So, just to kind of reiterate what we've done so far, I said that this is not a scientific question. It's a question of metaphysics. Quoted philosopher of science Michael Roos, who even himself says that there are certain questions science can't ask, much less answer. Because to try and ask for scientific or empirical evidence for a soul would be like trying to look for an invisible man. If I say an invisible man exists and someone says, well, no, he doesn't because I looked for him and I didn't see him, it's to fail to understand the nature of what's being said. That doesn't prove there is an invisible man, but it does show that in order to disprove there is no invisible man, you cannot appeal to the sense of sight. So I think already it started off as a category fallacy from Arn's part. Now, I did, just I guess to even reiterate some of the points I made was if consciousness is physical, according to Leibniz's law of the indiscernibility of identicals, every conscious mental state and property is going to have to be identical and share some physical state and property with the physical, but I demonstrated and showed through a number of ways that it has, and I would just invite the listeners to go back and listen to my opening. Then you have using the same concept of Leibniz's law of identity, that I am more than my brain and body. If I'm nothing more than a brain and body, we can put it this way. If I'm just a brain and body, then personhood is a degreed property, and people with more mass and matter are more persons than people who are not. And as I said, men are typically larger than women, and yet we wouldn't say that men have more value or are more persons than women. That's because being a person is not something that can be grounded in something physical. You also have identity through change. Physical objects, aggregates, which is a metaphysical technical term, do not maintain identity through change or part replacement. I do. I am the same person from one moment to the next. Even if I lose and gain new memories or parts, or if I become, God forbid, a paraplegic, I am still 100% a person. I'm still Eric Hernandez, which shows us that my identity and existence as a human person is not dependent on nor grounded in something physical like my brain and body. Then we talked about free will, which Arn seemed to say that he didn't believe in, and then at one point said that he freely came to believe that he did not have free will, but then also said in another instance, if I'm not mistaken, that he doesn't believe we have free will. Basically, if there is no soul, there can be no free will, because you're just a purely physical object which is going to react to external factors based on the laws of chemistry and physics, and every action, thought, and belief is going to be causally determined by external factors beyond your control, including the belief there is no soul and there is no God. And if that's the case, why should you believe what you're determined to believe? I don't shake a magic 8-ball in it when it says yes, I believe it, because it's not something designed to obtain truth, and it's not something with free will. It's something that is just determined to say. There's no reason for me to believe it. And if all your beliefs, actions, and thoughts are causally determined, you have no reason, and you're not justified in believing anything that you do believe, because you're just a byproduct of chemistry and physics that is causally determined. However, he freely came to be just in the soul of intellectual reasons, and I think rightly really who do harm and evil, and he wants to hold them morally accountable. But if you're just a physical brain and body, that's something that can't be done. So if you are the same person from one moment to the next, if you have free will, if you have intellectual responsibility, moral responsibility, and if all the properties of the brain and the properties of the mind are not shared, then it follows that you cannot be merely something physical. You must be something more than that, namely a soul. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Eric. Closing statement. All right, Arn, you're up for your closing remarks.
Yeah, Eric makes so many unwarranted assumptions. For example, the definition of personhood is by definition of being, not weight, measured in a gradient by height or weight. And he said that this doesn't apply to him, but it does, because it's a matter of history. I mean, when I describe why did we come to believe that we have a soul or spirit, this really is, I think, the reason. I'm going to get into it. We feel the breeze against our bodies all the time. Early tribes of primitive people couldn't explain the changes in the clouds or the weather that they brought, but they knew that the wind could move things, even carry things off into the sky as if held aloft by invisible hands. And no one knew what smoke was. They thought that dust devils were literally devils, and that's where the legends of genies came from. Whirlwinds appear out of nowhere and throw your stuff around and then disappear in evanescence. That's how that's why we still imagine spirits, how we still imagine spirits today, at least the devilish ones. No one understood diseases either, but they figured out pretty quickly that rancid fumes or the breath of a sick person could make others sick too. That's why they say bless you when you sneeze, because sneezing and coughing are how you spread disease. They thought that when you sneeze, the good spirit leaves your body and an evil spirit might jump in to take your place. That's why they say bless you. If you're sneezing or coughing, you're spreading evil spirits that might kill you or someone else. And notice that in the Bible, God performs a golem spell where he fashions a man out of mud and breathes into it the breath of life, to animate it, to make it come alive. Wherein Adam did not acquire a soul, instead he became a living soul. And there are other versions of this trope in even older myths from Mesopotamia through the Orient, where some sort of magician makes clay figures come alive by breathing the breath of life into them. There are also other references to the breath of life, where the movement of air is akin to a spiritual essence. A traditional Jewish belief is that when newborns take their first breath, they are infused with the spirit and become a living being. So air equals spirit. Since no one yet understood that air was made of particulate matter, but everyone knew that you would die if you can't breathe, and they knew that when people or animals die, they stop breathing, then it was believed that the movement of air was somehow spiritual, and that the spirit went inside you to give you life. In Genesis 1:2, when it says that only the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters, it's obviously talking about the wind. For another example, in Ezekiel 37:5-10, or 5 through 10, there's a necromancer going into a boneyard to revive an army of the dead. Thus saith the Lord God unto these bones, Behold, I will cause breath to enter you, and ye shall live. And I will lay sinews upon you, and bring flesh upon you, and cover you with skin, and put breath in you, and ye shall live. And ye will know that I am the Lord. So I prophesied as I was commanded, and as I prophesied, there was a noise, and behold, a shaking, and the bones came together, bone to his bone. And then I beheld, lo, the sinews and the flesh came upon them, and the skin covered them all above, and there was no breath in them. Then he said unto me, Prophesy unto the wind. Prophesy, Son of Man, to say to the wind, Thus saith the Lord God, Come, ye four winds, O breathe and breathe upon these slain, that they may live. So I prophesied as he commanded, and the breath came into them, and they lived and stood up on their feet, an exceeding great army. I should point out that the four winds, or animate, were Greek gods, different than Yahweh, the volcano god, and it's surprising that he would tell one of his prophets to pray to Anamoi. But of course, then in the Genesis 6, we have the flood, which was meant to drown everything that had the breath of life. And then Ecclesiastes 3:18-21 gives another example of how our notions of spirituality actually stem from a misunderstanding of the natural aspects of air. I said to myself concerning the sons of men, that God has surely tested them in order for them to see that they are but beasts. For the fate of the sons of men and the fate of beasts is the same. As one dies, so does the other. Indeed, they all have the same breath, and there is no advantage for man over beast, for all is vanity. All go to the same place. All come from the dust and return to the dust. Who knows that the breath of man ascends upward and that the breath of the beast descends downward into the earth? And notice here again that if we had a soul, then animals have one too, but we don't. It's just our breath. All the rest is vanity. And thus, according to this is according to the New American Standard Bible, the New Revised Standard Version, the American Version, and the King James Version all replace the word breath with spirit. And likewise, if you compare Luke 23:46 in the New American Standard,
Instances of people being alive after death. You have even Christ talking to the Sadducees and
hello and welcome to another episode of Why Do You Believe? A series that I do that just to keep me from listening to an echo chamber. I like to take a chance to reason with people who hold disparate opinions or different opinions from my own. So today I have on Eric Hernandez. Now, I did a video recently where I was talking about what faith means, as I understand it, and I've been criticized by a number of believers telling me that I got the wrong definition. So we're going to go over that. And Eric, specifically, what would you say is the problem with my definition?
Well, I'd say that you seem to, as I've seen in your videos and you said in that last video, you seem to understand what the word pistis means. And I would say that is what the Greek word, that's the Greek word that's used in the Bible. So we would know that that means something like trust or confidence. Yet in public, or when you have any kind of discourse like this, you say that faith is a belief without evidence and defended against all reason and all that stuff.
Yeah. Would you now? Pistis means, has a handful of meanings, much like faith still does. There are different contexts.
The English word, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I can say, I don't because it causes people confusion, but I can say that I have faith in my wife. I can say that I'm a faithful husband, which means something very, very different. than religious faith. So I specify precisely which context I'm talking about. I'm only talking about religious faith. Now, if pistis means a combination, or depending on the sentence that it's used in, it could mean conviction, it could mean persuasion, it could mean belief, it could mean faithfulness, trustworthiness, a number of things like that. So the original word pistis, I think, was divided in English into a number of other words that cover the different contexts a little bit more precisely. Not entirely so, because faith still has two contexts, at least just within itself.
Well, if I can interject here, right? But obviously the New Testament was written in English, right? So the Greek word being
The New Testament was written in English?
not written in English.
Okay, right. That's what it agreed.
So and then given that we get pistis from the New Testament, in that Greek word, why would you use the term religious faith and then give it a different definition?
Because of the reason I was just explaining. So with faith, the English version of one particular context of that, where then you can say that faith is a belief or that faith is a trust, doesn't really matter which of those two you use. The context is always implied that it's going to be based on loyalty, that you're believing it because you're told to believe it and not for any other reason. So when I say as...
And where are you getting this from, you said?
What?
You're getting this from where?
The context in which it is applied.
You're talking about biblically?
Yes.
Okay.
So the Bible is always expecting that you are going to believe, and this is not just the Bible, this is also the Bhagavad Gita has a similar interpretation of faith, as does the Quran.
But you're talking to a Christian, right? So we'll stick to the New Testament.
Okay. But if we have a word that transcends, doesn't matter which religion it's talking about, in all the different religions, we get the same thing.
Okay, well, I can't speak for all of the religions. I can only speak for the New Testament. And no, it's not used as believing without evidence or believing in spite of evidence.
Okay. So I'm making a negative claim here. I'm saying that faith is a belief that is not dependent on evidence.
I understand
And
that.
the reason I'm saying that is because there is no implication in any holy book that the belief is going to be based on any kind of, and we're being specific again, we've talked about subjective impressions, circular reasons, assumptions of authority, things like that. Things that people will subjectively consider evidence, but we're, again, being very precise. I'm talking only about religious faith, and religious faith is not based on empirical evidence. So in saying that it is not dependent on empirical evidence, you are told to believe the thing. And like in the Quran, for example, it says exactly like the Bible does. It says that you believe in what you do not see, or else. And the Bible is very clear about that. You will believe it or else.
Okay, but to not for neither one of us to go on long rants, how about to make the conversation a little better, you can ask me what I believe instead of telling me what I believe or what other religions believe, and I think that'd make.
I'm not asking you what you believe. We're not talking about what you believe.
Well, you're saying that faith is going to be this, and every religion is going to be this, and everything's going to be this. So you're giving me a lot of assertions, but since you're talking to someone face to face, you can just ask. What maybe you can say, what do you think about my perception or position or view on this, and I can give you my opinion.
Okay, well, I was getting ready to do that, but it doesn't matter what you believe, to be quite frank.
Okay.
We're talking about objective truth. We're talking about what we can show to be true. Okay?
Right. Sure.
So
that has to do with what I said.
I can show that I am using the correct usage, the correct interpretation, that faith is a belief that is not dependent on evidence. So to say that it is, if you want to take a counter position, the only implication I think would have to be that you're going to say that it is dependent on evidence. And therefore, you got two things that you're going to have. You're going to have both a statement that the evidence dominates regardless what somebody wants to say. You know, test it out yourself and see. Like in my video, I presented a quote by the Buddha, who was giving, believe it only because the evidence says so, not because of what anybody else says.
Okay, but you're not talking to a Buddhist.
Right, I understand that, but we're still talking about objective truth here. Right. So if the Bible had said something similar, where it said, believe this only because the evidence indicates that, and disbelieve it if the evidence indicates otherwise, then you would be able to say that faith is based on evidence.
Which it does.
Which it doesn't. It nowhere in the Bible does it say that empirical evidence.
Here's where you can ask.
Override or change. nowhere in the Bible does it say that empirical evidence can override or correct or dissuade a faith-based belief.
Okay, so I'm assuming you're letting me talk here. So even Paul said if there's no resurrection, Christianity is not true. So and then he says here are the people you can talk to. He mentions witnesses. Now, whether or not you believe the resurrection would be beside the point. The point here would be that he is saying, here's what we believe and here's why. Here's the people we've spoken to. The book of Luke is written entirely, starts out with, I've written an account of the things that have happened so that you would believe. So they're giving evidence, they're giving reasons. So you can't say it's not based on evidence.
No, I can, because they're
Yeah, but it doesn't make you right.
they're giving hearsay for their reasons, and they're saying like in the
So an empty tomb would be hearsay.
I'm sorry, what?
An empty tomb would be hearsay. And earlier you mentioned empirical beliefs. Why do you always go to empirical? And even in
Because
the
we were talking about, because the term that I was using, and I was being very clear about this, and I think everybody agrees that religious belief is not based on scientific evidence. Now, scientific evidence would be empirical evidence. I'm just being clear.
Okay, so let's be more specific. So God, well, you said religious. I mean, there's a lot of claims about religion. I mean, Christianity would say the universe had a beginning. That could be tested empirically, right? There would be scientific evidence to show that the universe had a beginning.
Well, then there's a problem, because I already know a physicist who says the universe didn't have a beginning.
I didn't ask if you knew anybody who didn't. I know a lot of people who have a lot of weird beliefs, but that's not
Okay. Well, we're not talking about a guy with weird beliefs. We're talking about a cosmologist. We're talking about Sean Carroll, who's,
right.
Never had a beginning.
Okay, so the principle though is when we're talking about God, I would absolutely agree with you regarding when you ask for scientific evidence, because I would say that is a category fallacy. You saw the video I made where I was critiquing you, asking for scientific evidence, which is something that only studies the physical. To study something non-physical would be a category fallacy, like trying to use a metal detector to try and detect plastic.
Except that it's not in this case, because if the supernatural were real, then we would have, as I've explained so many times, we would have, a Spock, an Obi-Wan, a Hermione. Somebody would be able, a Gandalf. Somebody would be able to demonstrate that there's a there, and that even if science couldn't explain it, they would have to acknowledge that there is at least a recognized phenomenon, a verified phenomenon, to indicate that such a possibility exists.
What do you? I don't think you get my point. But what do you mean by verified phenomenon?
We can't just say that anything is possible, because we know many things that are not possible. And so it is not possible, for example, for a cow to jump over the moon, for many different reasons having to do with physics.
Can I, just to get on the same page, so when you talk about possibilities, are you talking about modal logic? Are you talking about metaphysically possible, logically possible?
Again, we've been talking about science.
No, if we're talking about God, we're talking metaphysics.
I'm sorry, what?
If we're talking about God or anything,
okay. So you're gonna admit then that I was right in my definition, and that we don't have empirical scientific evidence of God, because by your own admission we can't even discuss God without it being metaphysical.
That you were right in your definition. I don't think
that it is not based on empirical evidence, because all discussion of God must therefore be metaphysical. Therefore, it can't be empirical. Thus, their faith is not based on empirical evidence, and I was right all along.
Okay, well, so I haven't heard you say faith is not based on empirical evidence. And again, faith is.
Well, you did actually. You were in the room when I said that faith is based on that faith is.
You're gonna have to let me talk. So. Faith is trust in something. You can't. Faith is not an epistemology. It's not a way of knowing something. It's once you have whatever you're looking for, then you make a decision, a volition to put your trust or faith or confidence in something. So it's going to be a case by case. When it comes to God, yes, I would absolutely agree with you that you're not going to use science to detect something like God, because it's a category fallacy. It would be like me trying to measure my weight by using a ruler.
Okay, so you're going to say that it's a category fallacy. And you're also going to say in the same conversation that it can be testable scientifically, that the universe, the origin of the universe can be tested, for example. There are a number of ways that we can test God claims, and all of them fail science.
The universe had a beginning is not a God claim. So again,
and that's not a test of Christianity, is it?
Asking me questions would be helpful. Well, you said religious beliefs. The fact the universe had a beginning, I'm a religious.
But we don't. That's not a fact. If we have a dispute among cosmologists, then it's not a fact. The fact is something that we can verify. And it depends on what you mean by beginning, too.
So, going back to what I was saying, because you're jumping all over the place here.
I'm not. I'm trying to stay focused.
Okay. We talked about religious beliefs. I'm a Christian, which is a religion, and part of my beliefs as a Christian is that the universe had a beginning.
Okay.
Now, that's not a God claim, but that is a claim within my religious belief system. So you have to apples and oranges here. So yes, when we're talking about God, absolutely, I would say it's a category fallacy to try and look for empirical evidence or scientific evidence.
Except that quite a few people do say that they have empirical evidence and they can never produce it. And they argue with me.
Okay, well, I'm not.
When I say that faith is not based on empirical evidence, they argue that I'm wrong, which would imply that there is empirical evidence, and clearly there is not.
Well, you can invite them on your show, but you're talking to me here.
Well, I am talking to you. You're the guy that said I was wrong when I said that faith is not based on empirical evidence.
You said faith is a belief that is not based on evidence, and
not based on empirical evidence. I was very specific, and I said that when you were in the room.
The listeners can go back and watch the video.
The listeners can also watch the video that I uploaded, where I included the entire scene, where you asked the question, and also where I specified that is based on arguments from authority. It's based on subjective impressions. It's based on logical fallacies, perhaps, but it is based on. But it is not based on empirical evidence. I did specify that, and I included that scene in my video.
So faith is something that's not. So trust is not based on empirical evidence.
Again, we're mixing contexts. If it means faith, if it means belief, depends on the context of the sentence. But in either case, it's not based on empirical evidence. So it's not based on science. It's not a conclusion that you reach scientifically.
Faith is a conclusion.
I would say so. Yeah. I mean, if it's in the terms of a belief, then yes, it would be a conclusion. A conviction, also, if you want to use that word, would be the same thing.
So if I believe, and so, again, it'd be helpful for you to just ask questions. If I believe that...
Why would I ask questions? What am I supposed to ask? I don't understand. Why are we asking?
A lot of assertions and accusations and saying like, well,
what?
You're making a lot of assertions.
No, I'm not.
A lot of which don't apply to me.
No, not one.
And going back to, if I have...
What assertion do you think I've made? And especially one that doesn't apply to you.
You're saying that any kind of evidence or reason that I have to believe in God is going to be based on a logical fallacy and the other...
I said on anything but scientific evidence. So, and you're admitting that it's not based on scientific evidence.
Right, because it's a category fallacy. When we're talking about God...
It would be a category fallacy when people are also saying in the same breath that they can prove scientifically the beliefs of Christianity.
Are you talking...
And so I have to argue that you cannot prove scientifically. So do you agree that you cannot prove Christianity scientifically?
I agree that you cannot prove nor disprove the existence of God scientifically.
Granted. Great. So we're both on the same page, and my definition was never incorrect, and I didn't need to be corrected about it.
So your definition, which in the video you said faith is pretending to know what you don't know.
Very often is, yes.
Very often. So
every time, yeah, because when you state who and what God is and what God will do and what God hates for what reason, right? You are making assertions. You are stating as fact what is really baseless speculation, but you're asserting it as fact. You're not doing the preface of, I believe. Now, if you did, I believe, and then put in X, it doesn't matter. But you're stating X is a fact. And that's the thing that irritates me the most about religious beliefs, that they assert baseless speculation as though it were a matter of fact. It's not.
Okay, I have not made any of those kind of speculations. I haven't made any assertions about God. So again, you're talking to me, not other people you talked in the past.
Okay, so I'm talking to a guy.
So baseless assertions. You even said in the video that it's impossible for God to exist, and even something like a soul is something that wouldn't even be possible.
Again, according to Sean Carroll, yes, and he's got even a physics formula for it.
So appeal to authority.
I'm sorry, what?
Appeal to authority?
No, not at all. If he's got a physics equation to it, then it's based on his math, and it's his argument. I'm not defending it.
If the soul exists, would it be physical?
It would have to be a transmission of the mind and our data and the physical peculiarities that make us what we are, that would then have to be transcribed into some immaterial being magical form.
Try it again.
What?
If the soul exists, would it be physical?
Originally, it was thought to be physical, yes, because the people who wrote the Bible didn't understand that air was particulate matter. But they knew that you would die if you can't breathe. So that's why translations of the Bible mix on. You wanted an answer to the question: was it the soul? The reason that you believe you have a soul is because the people who wrote the Bible didn't know what air is.
That's the reason
they thought that air was spirit. So that's why in Ecclesiastes 3:18-21, where it says, "Who knows whether the breath of..." I'm sorry, what?
You're making an assertion again about me that is not even
I'm not making any assertions about you.
But you're pretending to know things you don't know.
I'm not pretending anything. I'm giving the evidence argument.
You don't know why I believe in the soul.
The reason people believe they have a soul
Aren't
evidently is because the people who wrote the Bible didn't know what air is.
Talking to me.
Yes, and you are a people, and you believe you have a soul, and the reason that people believe they have a soul, evidently, is because the Bible didn't know what air is.
Evidently.
Yes.
So it's evident.
All the indications are. That's why, and I'm trying to give the evidence to support the argument.
That's not the evidence for the argument.
What?
That's not the evidence for the argument.
You haven't heard it. You keep shutting me up and telling me that it's immaterial.
You're talking about your argument that you're giving. That
I was giving you the evidence to back my conclusion.
That I believe that.
The people who wrote the Bible had no idea what air is. I'm giving you, because there's actually quite a lot of it throughout Scripture.
Okay.
When I talk, what?
So, in other words, you're saying people, which you say I'm part of. So you're essentially accusing me of believing in the soul because people who wrote the Bible didn't know what air was.
Yes.
Okay, that's not why I believe in the soul.
Okay, the reason that you are aware of the idea that people have a soul evidently came from this misperception.
Why do you say evidently?
I mean, that's what the evidence is. There is no evidence of soul, but there is evidence that people who wrote the Bible didn't know that air was particulate matter. They thought it was supernatural. So they thought it was the breath of life that you could like carve a sculpture and breath of life into it. That's the golem spell. They animate that and make it come to life.
You're jumping around again.
I'm not jumping at all. I'm staying on target.
We're talking about my beliefs.
We're not talking about your beliefs. We are not talking about your beliefs. Your beliefs are irrelevant.
So why are you talking to me?
Because you made an accusation that I was using the wrong definition, or that the definition that say that religious faith is not based on empirical evidence. You said that was wrong.
Right,
I'm here to explain that is correct, and you've already agreed that that's correct. Now,
no.
there's further that we can go.
Faith is believing
other accusations too.
Pretending to know that you don't know. That is one of the definitions of faith.
Yeah, it's making the assertion. Let's be specific. You have seen yourself that people have used that to assert that God is. Not that I believe God is, but simply that God is. So if you ever said God is the way and the truth and the life and all that, you are asserting based on speculation as though it were fact. So if you're going to tell me you've never done that, well, that's fine, but you understand that most people do that.
Okay, so back to what I was saying. The accusation I had made was that it was seemingly disingenuous the way you present yourself, the way you define faith, and you even said towards the end, faith really is pretending to know what you don't know. And then I also accused you in my video of having faith based on your own definition, since you assert things and pretend to know what you don't know, and there's speculation to what you're saying.
I don't.
You don't know why I believe in the soul, and you started going on a rant about
the evident reason why people evidently believe in the soul. Yes.
Interrupting me.
Including yourself as a person, being a religious person. Why all religions believe in a soul? Yes. Because that's what air is.
Okay. So, what about people who don't even? Okay. Try to track with me here. That's not why I believe in a soul.
Okay. It's not why you think you believe in a soul. Gotcha.
So you know why I believe better than what I do. You know the reasons I believe.
Well, I know why people evidently believe in the soul is for this reason that is supported by evidence that
But let's jump to this, because I accuse you. So baseless speculations, and that's part of being faith.
I'm not the one making baseless speculations. I'm the one that's making. I'm the one that's presenting arguments. Or excuse me, evidence.
You're giving assertions.
Position.
You're giving a lot of assertions, and none of
assertions because I'm giving evidence in support of a position. I'm not the one making assertions.
You're giving evidence that I believe something for a reason, which I told you I don't.
You don't know that this is the reason that people collectively devised religions, believing that they have a soul, because they came with this idea that air was spiritual somehow.
So this is a soul goes way far back, and even people who are non-religious believe in the soul. There are atheists who believe in the soul. They believe in the soul because of the Bible.
I'm sorry, what?
Atheists who believe in the soul. They believe it because people in the Bible didn't know what air was.
As I told you, there are multiple religions that are based on this concept.
Talking about atheists.
And I was talking about religions.
You're talking about people, and you said I'm a person.
Right.
And you said people believe in the soul for that reason. What about the atheists who believe in the soul? They believe in the soul for that reason?
Are you talking about atheists who are animists, or atheists who are Buddhists,
I'm talking
or
about atheists who believe in the soul.
who are Chinese traditional spiritualists?
Atheists who believe in the soul.
Okay, so if you're talking about Taoists or Buddhists or somebody who believes in supernatural things but also just doesn't happen to include gods, those people, yeah, those people would believe in the soul, because originally people didn't understand what air was, but they knew that you would die.
So people don't come to believe in the soul for rational reasons.
Meaning empirical evidence?
So okay, okay, we're getting somewhere here. So you're assuming rational reasons must necessarily be empirical evidence.
Of course.
And what empirical evidence do you have that rational reasons must necessarily be empirical evidence?
So we're going to go to solipsism now?
How that is not okay. Don't assume what you think I'm getting to.
I'm not assuming. I'm asking.
Not at all. I don't even know what that has to do with solipsism.
Okay, so it's just a frustrating thing for me that I don't have to get very far into a conversation with a believer before they immediately start questioning whether reality exists. And the best way to diffuse any evidence I present is to pretend that I can't prove that I existed 2 weeks ago.
You know what self-defeating means?
What's that?
You know what it means to be self-defeating?
Yeah.
What does it mean?
It means when you use, well, logical fallacies are one good example of that, where you defeat your own argument, like you did when you challenged me, saying that you have ways of proving Christianity scientifically, but you can't even discuss God without it being metaphysical instead of science.
Okay, whoa.
And that you said that I can't, and I'm using the wrong definition, but at the same time you also confirmed that I'm using the right definition because it can't be empirical.
Yeah, so that didn't answer my question. No, I never said you can prove God scientifically. I thought I was clear about that. It's a category fallacy. Self-defeating is when you make a statement.
When you said that you could prove claims of Christianity by the fact, for example, that the universe had a beginning, assuming that that was a fact beginning.
We're talking about religious beliefs, and I said that people can rewind it and watch that for themselves. You're really not
People can rewind it and watch for themselves, yes, and I encourage that they do.
Okay, thank you. So, I never said. Okay, no, we're gonna try to stick to what we're saying. So, what was the last thing you said before you started talking about? Oh, it's self-defeating, right? So something is self-defeating is if you make a statement, and when that statement is applied to itself, if it proves itself wrong, then it's a logical fallacy. To say,
right.
Okay, to say any evidence must necessarily be empirical evidence.
No, I didn't say. No. I specified again. And I did this earlier. We can wind back and play it again if you want, but we don't have to go through all this. I said you can have subjective evidence. You can have fallacious evidence. You can have the conviction be the assumption of itself in circular reasoning, because question-begging fallacy is fundamental across every religion. But I specified that when I'm talking about evidence...
That's a question-begging statement you just made.
I specified that when I'm talking about evidence, I am talking specifically about scientific evidence.
So everything must be proven scientifically.
Did I say that? Did I in any way imply it?
I am asking. That's what you do when you have conversations. You ask the person, is this what they meant to clarify? And if not...
I did not imply that everything must be proven scientifically. There are things that can be proven logically. Not everything can be proven logically. Some things can only be proven scientifically.
Okay. Well, okay. So then evidence isn't necessarily empirical then. By what
I also said that we're talking specifically about empirical evidence. We're talking specifically about whether faith is based on scientific evidence.
You don't track very well because we were talking about evidence, and I asked you...
Yes, I do track very well because I specified again and again, and you keep forgetting that I was talking about scientific evidence, not subjective evidence.
So you do,
scientific evidence.
You interrupt every few words I speak. That's why I wanted somebody to be here as a moderator, because you do interrupt a lot. And then you don't even track with what you're saying. We were talking. I asked if evidence must necessarily be empirical. You said yes.
And I said no. I said I allow that there is such a thing as subjective evidence, but that in this case we're not talking about that. We're not saying that faith is not based on subjective evidence. It certainly is. We're saying that faith, religious faith, is not based on scientific evidence.
Let me say this. just to try and be fair here, I did not once hear you say faith is not based on empirical evidence. Every time I hear you talk about faith, all you simply say is this mantra that you've memorized, that faith is pretending you know what you don't know, and it's belief without evidence and even against all evidence and
That's
against
true.
all reason.
Yeah, because we actually have arguments against the origin of the universe. We have arguments against the origin of the soul. If I bring you, as Cy Gart did the other day,
Well, I didn't even finish my point. It's like you're not listening to understand. You listen to see where you can respond and jump in.
I listen to understand because my goal in life is not to believe things. My goal is to improve my understanding. So it would counter my own goal if I didn't listen to understand. You have a different goal, which is to believe and to defend that belief.
You don't have beliefs?
Pardon me?
You don't have beliefs?
Not in the context you do.
What context would that be?
To my experience, when a unbeliever says he believes something, that means, and I don't say it because I don't like to confuse people, it means that this is something I think to be true or is most likely probably closest to the truth, but that I don't know it to be true because I can't show it to be true. And if you can't show it, then you don't know it. But when a believer says they believe, again, to my experience, what that has meant is that it's an act of will, of mind over matter, to convince themselves of something that is not evidently true because they have to believe. And so when they give me the reasons why they believe, they're always incredibly vacuous. Like, I believe because I want to know that I'm going to see my dead father again.
Okay, that I want you to keep, because you're making a lot of, again, assertions.
Again, I'm not making any assertions. I was explaining to my experience. That is correct. That is what happens according to my experience.
So you
I
don't
no assertions.
So you claim that you don't have beliefs in the context I do because you think
because I don't make myself believe anything.
Do you know how beliefs work? How people come to beliefs?
Yes, there is, as I said, two different contexts. One that the unbeliever uses, one that the believer uses. The believer uses an act of will.
Yes or no question.
Believes regardless of evidence.
It was a yes or no question. I'm asking because I'm just getting clarity here. Are you from? So would you? Because it seems like you think that belief can be an act of will.
Yes, because believers have expressed exactly that to you.
Okay, well, I disagree with. Okay, so you really got to stop listening to what any believer tells you and actually look this stuff up, because what you're appealing to is what's called dogmatic voluntarism, which I don't adhere to. Are you familiar with that?
Again, we're still on topic.
Or no?
No, I have not heard doxastic volunteerism.
Okay, right.
I have heard people say.
Yes or no?
I have heard people admit many times, many ways, that they believe what they want to because they want to. And then I've heard other people who profess to be objective.
This is
minutes later.
It's really hard to get to a point to where when I ask a yes or no question, you go on to another rant.
I don't get into rants. Not in this. In this conversation, I haven't sidetracked, I haven't bounced all over the place, I haven't made any assertions. None of that.
Okay.
You're the one that is not focused. You came in here with 4 or 5 points that you were supposed to address, and so far we haven't addressed those. We've gone someplace else instead.
All right. So back to what we're saying. So beliefs are not things you can just will. No, it's impossible to just will a belief.
Okay. And so all the people I've talked to have said otherwise. They were all lying, or I'm lying, I guess. Either way, right?
You gullibly just believe what people tell you.
I don't gullibly believe them, but that's what they tell me.
Okay, but if it's not possible, then whether they tell you or not, it can't be true. Right?
It is possible to believe in a God that isn't evidenced in any way, and then just go about that.
Not what I asked. Can you just can you force yourself to believe something by just willing it? If I said I will pay you $1 million to believe that there's a pink elephant flying in the room, could you do it?
Well, let me see. Historically, we have had people offered land.
About you. Can you do it? If I offered you, Arn Ra, $1 million, could you believe a pink elephant is flying in the room? Can you make yourself believe something by an act of will?
If it was something that requires faith, then yes. Now, I'm not of the philosophical mindset to do that, but we know we have.
I can tell that. Say that again?
We have people who were offered money to believe. We've had people who were threatened.
How would you know they actually believed it? Like, how could
you know that you don't? As long as they pay tithes to the church and
hold on. So they wait.
This doesn't matter.
So they don't believe it. You said, is that what you said? Because you say one thing and you keep going. You're saying so they don't actually believe it?
We don't know. As you said, there's no way to know.
So then how did
These people do. There are people in my family
I
who
would say they believe?
they're told simply because they're told, and there's no amount of evidence that will ever convince them otherwise.
Okay, wait. So you don't know if they believe it, yet you're going around saying people believe things when they know
On
it's
an individual basis.
okay. But I'm saying it's impossible for someone to believe something they don't take to be true. If someone believes something, they're going to have to believe it's true. That's part of what it means to have a belief. It's something you take to be true.
And so how do people change from one religion to another?
By analyzing the evidence and exposing themselves to more
There's
information.
no evidence. You said so yourself.
I said there's no evidence, or I said there's no empirical evidence. It's a category fallacy. So you're not tracking. That's proof right there. I have empirical.
Again, it's not a category fallacy if the premise is, as you said, one, that faith is based on empirical evidence, which was the thing that you said I got wrong.
Nope,
And
that's not.
now you failed to track that, and now you're saying that, okay, I was correct, that faith is not based on empirical evidence. And that
Okay,
you can prove the claims
so-
of Christianity using scientific methods.
No, my goodness. Wow. This is.
Okay, so what was your other complaints then?
Well, I've got a lot more now because you are not tracking well. You take one thing I say, and then you jump to the next thing, or you assume something, or you try to kind of.
So in order to say that faith is based on evidence, we've established that you don't.
Can I first just what the point I was trying to get to earlier, and maybe this I hope it would help, was another when I said I was going to try to be fair. If you did say that faith is a belief that is not based on empirical evidence, then I did not hear that. So if you said that, I'm admitting right now to hear it. What I did hear and what you said most of the time, and in the video I made, the only thing you did say was things like faith is a belief without evidence, that pretend to know what you don't know. I did not hear the caveat, nor was it in my video, that it is specifically empirical evidence. In your response to my question, which wasn't even an answer to my question, it was a tangent. You said you're looking for scientific evidence, which I would concede and have conceded that yes, no scientific evidence.
So in the video that I made in response to yours, and which you said was not a response, I also there specified that normally when I'm having these conversations, it is with creationists who are trying to use scientific evidence to prove Christianity.
I'm not talking to that person. You're talking to me.
Right. And right now, I'm talking to you and explaining something to you, which for whatever reason, you refuse to understand. So as I said, in that video that you said you watched, I said that normally I have these conversations with creationists who are trying to use science to prove Christianity, and normally I don't have to specify that we are talking about scientific evidence, though I did specify it in this debate with Inspiring Philosophy because I knew that he was not a creationist. I said that in my video.
Okay.
So now, as far as other things, now his disingenuous question that where he asked if I knew of a scholar in present tense and who specializes in Koine Greek who thought that pistis means denying evidence of reason. All right. Now we understand that pistis means all these other different things. Only one of those contexts would be taken without scientific evidence. So of course that question is invalid. If I'm completely correct in my statement, then I would not know anybody specializing in Koine Greek who would say that that pistis means denying evidence of reason. That's not even my position. That is at best a straw man. Now, do I know of...
You said?
What?
You didn't say that?
I didn't say what?
That faith is denying evidence of reason?
Faith is a belief that is not dependent on evidence. It's not based on scientific evidence, right?
So you're
if you're going to say that if you're going to say that my definition is wrong, then you have to show that it is dependent on scientific evidence, meaning that it is repeatable and verifiable.
So are you telling me that the Bible defines faith as denying or going against scientific evidence?
Yes, multiple times, including one time
Really?
where Jesus says that says to Thomas, "You believed because you have seen me. Blessed are those who have not seen me, and yet they believe," making very clear that the true faith is one that comes without evidence. Anybody can believe if you have sufficient evidence, but the true faith comes when you believe it just because you're told to,
I don't
want to, and not because the evidence implies.
I don't know what Bible translation you're reading that says faith is believing against scientific evidence. And what Jesus was getting at here was Thomas had sufficient evidence, and then he gave him more evidence and then showed them the no start hand. So even there you could say
And then says, "Blessed is he who does not," or blessed are they.
yeah, because they're better off. Yeah, because they had the evidence they needed.
But they didn't. Blessed are those who did not see and yet believe. So what he's saying is that those who have seen are not blessed. It's only those who have not seen that are blessed. That's the true faith.
No. So
And that's why faith is believing in walking in faith, not in sight. It's believing in what you don't see. And the many different links that I put in when I put in the video that you responded to said wasn't even a rebuttal. I put in several different philosophers, theologians, and so forth who were explaining what faith is in their interpretation.
No, what you did, you put in people who were not specialized in Koine Greek, like Michael asked. You put in.
It wouldn't matter if they were specialized in Koine Greek.
Because that was specifically his question, and you put in someone like Dan.
Right, and it wouldn't matter, would it?
Really, Dan? You're going to quote Dan Barker as a scholar? Seriously?
As a theologian, because that's what he in fact was for many years of his life.
Being a pastor does not make you a theologian. See, that's the thing. You don't even get simple categories within Christianity.
Theologian?
I'm sorry?
I believe his Wikipedia page lists him as a theologian.
So you're going to quote Wikipedia as your source?
Well, if he's declaring that he was a theologian, what am I supposed to say?
You're not, because he's wrong.
All right. So what is a theologian? Have you looked up what a theologian is?
Yes, and as you know, it's someone who would qualify as a scholar in theology would be someone who has a PhD.
Actually, that's not the first definition that comes up.
Right. So
it doesn't matter the scholarship, apparently.
Sorry, are you a theologian?
No.
Okay, so what is a theologian?
A theologian. I'm going to have to look it up myself because I don't want to get this wrong.
Because when we're talking about scholars, you know exactly well what we're talking about. We're talking about theologians. Dan Barker is not a theologian, much less a scholar.
Okay, a person who engages or is an expert in theology, and he spent decades of his life.
Just spending decades does not make you a scholar.
Okay, but it doesn't say scholar here, does it?
I didn't say it said scholar.
Okay. Well, very good then.
The person who spent... Say it again?
He spent decades of his life...
No, you're reading the definition of a theologian.
Let me see, where was it? Hold on a second. I don't want to close this. Okay, I can't minimize it. Who studied in or is an expert in, either or, in theology.
Okay, how does one become an expert in something?
No, it says engages in or is an expert in.
You engage in theology, do you not?
No.
No?
No, as I explained to Cy Gart the other day, I don't, he says I'm a terrible theologian. I'm sorry, that's absolutely right. I don't use theology at all. Theology is the appropriate interpretation of a particular scripture. I'm, he wanted to accuse me of being every bit as bad as a creationist in that I read the Bible literally. I'm like, that's absolutely right, I do. And I can understand where it's obviously metaphorical, and the creationists don't understand that it's metaphorical. Like Genesis, for example, we know that there was never a tree.
My question was,
knowledge of good and evil.
What's theology? What's theology? What's theology was my question. I don't know why you went to eternity.
I was explaining to you what theology is. I was answering your question.
It's the study of God, yes?
You could summarize it as a study of God.
That's literally, okay.
Okay, so Dan Barker is a theologian because he studied God.
No. So we're talking about scholars and experts, and then you went to Dan Barker. Then you
engages in or is an expert, so it's an either or. You don't have to achieve expertise to be a theologian, apparently.
So I have
if it was a requirement,
I thought I had
to qualify, at least according to his own description.
I thought I had a problem with interruption, and I thought I worked in it. I have ADHD, but you interrupt far more than I do, and a lot, and you're not tracking with me.
Okay, well then let's get back on topic. You had some other.
Here is, if we're talking about studying God, looking into the existence of God, then you would be a theologian, but you wouldn't claim to be a theologian. Dan Barker is definitely not a theologian, which he is an expert in it, just like someone who studies science doesn't.
All right. Well, I think Dan Barker has described himself as a theologian. I wouldn't want to call him a liar on that, but I don't want to pull a quote on him either. He was described as a theologian. I'll leave it.
So if I describe myself as a scientist, you'd believe it? And if I put it on a Wikipedia page,
there's a way to show whether you engage.
That was my question.
I think the minimum requirement for that is that you publish your research to peer-reviewed journals. That would be the minimum criteria.
Dan Barker published in your peer review.
I wasn't accusing him of being a scientist.
Well, I mean, so that's only a requirement for scientists, not anybody else?
I didn't say that was the only requirement. I said I thought that was the minimum requirement. I may advocate science. I may actually even perform science. But if I don't publish to peer review, then I don't think I've met the minimum criteria.
Okay, then Barker wouldn't be a theologian.
Why?
He has no expertise in it.
Well, he does apparently have expertise, but this is not the thing that we're supposed to argue about.
Right? No, you're right. But my point is, you really stretch at things, and you try to make things that are not.
I don't.
Yeah, you do. Calling Dan Barker theologian is a huge stretch.
It's not a stretch at all. But let's let that be. So you don't want to say that he matches the standard definition. You don't want to admit that. That's fine.
That he's not an expert.
You can argue that with him. I'm not concerned about it. I put up many different citations that also prove the point. And I'd like to mention one to you since you called me out for this. And do you remember the question you asked me verbatim?
Not verbatim, but basically, given so I'm glad you asked that you're finally asking questions here. One of my main accusations was how disingenuous your alleged 20 years of research seemed. And it seems like you're on this script, and if I could just be honest with you, it's very evident you're on a script because
I'm not on a script. I'm doing this freehand.
You know what I mean when I say
no. I don't know what you mean.
Well, then
I'm not on a script. I've had the exact same argument that I'm having with you over and over again for 20 years, so I'm pretty well rehearsed in what nonsense I'm about to hear. If that's what you mean, then okay. But I'm not on a script otherwise.
So here's why I say you're on a script. In 2014, you had a debate with Matt Slick. It was 5 years ago. And in 2014, you told Matt Slick, when he asked you how you know something that you were knowing, and you said, because I've been doing this for 20 years, which means you have not even updated your own script in at least 5 years. To still say you're doing it for 20 years, yet you said that in 2014, you have not updated your script. It seems like you have not really even looked into this stuff.
I became an activist in 1997. It's
and so,
20 years, 22 years.
So then you were lying back then.
No, I wasn't lying.
Because
I'm rounding.
Asserting facts as though they are facts, and they're not facts.
No,
so
I'm not. As I said, it's been over 20 years since 1997, but it's easier to say 20 than 22. It's fine. It doesn't matter. We're just rounding it.
Okay, right. But you're asserting. We're just right. Yeah, it's a real good way of putting it. We're just rounding it. It's not that you're on a script. No, of course not. Couldn't possibly be that. Couldn't be that you're being disingenuous or whatever. No.
Of course not. I'm an honest person, so yeah, it couldn't be that.
And you expect me to take your word on faith?
No. But thank you for acknowledging that that's what it would be.
Right, it would be a trust that I would confide in you. Right, which I, quite frankly, I can't say I do because the track record hasn't been too good.
So you assert without evidence.
No, it is evidence. You said in 2014 you've been doing it for 20 years. You said in 2019 there's a 5-year gap there. You haven't updated your script. You're asserting facts as though they aren't.
You know what? You know why? I hadn't counted up. I hadn't counted up for when it was 1997. So what year is this? No, that would actually be 19 years or 18 years. You're right. So I'm just rounding. I'm making an estimate, and that's approximately correct. And it still is. When I say 20 years now, and it's actually been 22 or 22 and a half or whatever, that's still correct.
Okay, so you round it up, round it down.
So when I get up to 24, 25, I might say that I've been doing it for a quarter of a century. And I think that would be approximately correct, too. So the question that you asked me verbatim, do you remember it?
Right. So is the fact that given that you couldn't name a scholar on the spot, yet you're so adamant about this definition, on the spot, given that the topic of the debate is Christianity dangerous, seemed to me that your alleged 20 years of research is flawed, biased, and dangerous to the pursuit of truth.
Then let me backtrack on a couple of things. One, it was a disingenuous question because if I'm absolutely correct in my position, then no scholar would ever say that pistis, which now we know means a number of different things, and only one of those contexts means or implies without faith. We know that nobody would ever say that pistis means exactly verbatim, denies evidence of reason, that it would have to be a belief or a conviction or whatever, maybe taken on trust or what have you, or taken on the word of authority, but not necessarily. So nobody would ever, if I'm absolutely correct, there would not be an expert in Koine Greek that would agree with that. That's if I'm correct. Got it? Okay. And you said I needed to name a scholar, and I did say that it is implied this way. And yes, we do have scholarship, but just not somebody specialized in Koine Greek. So it wouldn't have to be specialized in Koine Greek.
But
the argument is.
But it would.
No, it wouldn't. And the reason that it wouldn't is because of where you're arguing, and you've already conceded this point, so you're re-arguing something you've already conceded, that faith is not based on scientific evidence.
Would you? Okay.
Market scholars would say this.
Okay. Yeah. And tell me why I say it's not, that the belief in God is not based on scientific evidence.
Because it's not.
No. Why do I say?
There's three reasons.
Tell me. I want to make sure you understand my position. Why do I say that that belief in God is not based on scientific evidence?
Okay. The three reasons are, and you will have another one, which is the excuse that it's metaphysical.
Why do I say that? Don't give me reasons. Why? What was my argument that belief in God is not based on scientific evidence?
What was your argument that I was right? I don't. You didn't make an argument that I was right.
No. Okay. So you're rephrasing the question. You're not tracking. There's a reason I said that I wouldn't claim to have scientific evidence for God.
Okay, so in that one, that was the one I was just saying that you interrupted me on, when I said that you will have another reason, which is the excuse that any discussion of God is going to be metaphysical. But for me, in order to say, if I'm incorrect, if I were wrong about faith religiously being based on scientific evidence, then you would have to have three things. You would have to have first a statement that the evidence overrides the assertion, regardless whatever the assertion is. That that empirical evidence can also be repeatable, testable. Scientific evidence can also disprove a faith-based belief, which of course we know that neither the Bible nor any other religious book will allow. And finally, the big one, and this was the one that I mentioned during the debate, is that you don't have scientific evidence. And so how could you even say that it was based on scientific evidence if you don't have any? And I thought I made that explicitly clear.
When have I said that my belief in God was based on scientific evidence?
When you told me I was wrong about my definition being based on scientific evidence. Now, I know that later tonight, you said that you didn't hear that. That's fine. I accept that. So now we're going on, what is faith based on? Faith is apparently based on authority. Faith, trust in authority. And we do have plenty of scholars who do agree with this. And even people that you would consider theologians definitely agree with what I state here.
Like who?
Huh?
Like who?
Well, Blaise Pascal was one.
And what did he say? What did he say?
What
did he say? What was his quote?
In Pascal's wager, within Pascal's wager, he makes the admission that faith is not testable.
No, I don't think that's what it makes the admission of.
Okay, I'll look it up.
And again, when we're talking about Greek, because see, as you
not talking about Greek.
We're not talking about Greek, pistis.
No. Yeah,
Really?
No, it doesn't matter because we're translating into English, so we're talking about English.
When the Bible writes something in Greek, and the context of the way it's used in that Greek word,
and now we're talking about what Blaise Pascal said. What language would you like that in?
Well, so here's what I'm saying. I'm getting at, even regardless of what Blaise Pascal said, and if you want to get into that later, we're talking about the Greek word that's written in the Bible. Christians who read the Bible and see that translated into English, but knowing the Greek word is pistis, in that context, pistis being the trust or loyalty is based on evidence, based on past experience.
It's not based on empirical scientific evidence, which we clarified.
Why do you assume?
And that I clarified numerous times.
Why do you assume things must be based on empirical evidence?
Because we're talking about science. We're not talking. We are not. I just want to clarify. We are not talking about what you personally have, your personal religious beliefs. We're talking about whether faith is based on scientific evidence. Done.
Okay. So what was my
Pascal's comment, by the way?
No. My question was, why are you assuming that any kind of evidence must be empirical or scientific? Why? Because is that what you're saying? That any evidence
because I don't want to be fooled into believing empty assertions.
So you are saying. Okay. So do you have empirical evidence that empirical evidence is the only evidence that could exist?
Again, you're not tracking very well because I have already repeatedly clarified for you that we are talking about science, so we're talking about empirical evidence, and I understand that other types of evidence exist that could lead to a religious conclusion, but that they are not scientific evidence. Please don't make me keep clarifying that point.
Okay, so if we look at something like, okay, if everything that has a shape has a size, that's a metaphysical principle. It cannot be proven scientifically. There's a lot of things science must assume before you can even do science. As it's been said, science is a slave to philosophy. I don't know why you're putting so much emphasis on science as if it is the only domain or way to gain knowledge.
Because I see it as such.
I'm sure you do, but it's
Space is obviously not a way of gaining knowledge.
You're right. It's not, and it's not claimed to be either.
So what do we have that actually will generate knowledge, or that we can gain knowledge?
What is knowledge?
I say that science doesn't know everything, but religion doesn't know anything.
Yeah, you have a lot of little sound bites like that, right? That you just memorize, right? That don't,
no, it's not that I.
Yeah.
So how is it wrong for me to understand the argument after having had it so many times?
So,
I mean, you're going to criticize me for knowing this argument because I've had it so many times, and in the same breath, you're going to criticize me for knowing it so well.
An assertion is not an argument.
Good. That's why I'm not using assertions.
That's
why I'm using evidence-based arguments, trying to give you the evidence.
Science doesn't know some things, religion knows nothing. That's an assertion. It's
that's
not
true. Well, no, that's a statement of fact.
That's not an argument. That's an assertion.
No, it's not. It's a statement of fact.
Which isn't what you asserted. Did you not assert that?
I didn't assert anything. It's a statement of fact. Religion doesn't know anything.
You can't assert
You can't. No religion can show that they have any more truth, that they have any truth to them at all, much less that they have any more truth than some other religion. None of them can.
What truth are you talking about? Because you're jumping all over.
I'm not jumping all over anything. You are. I'm the one trying to stay focused, and you're the one that keeps changing the damn subject. The truth is what the facts are, what we can show to be true. We can't just say that whatever that we want to believe is the truth, because we have theologians from all different religions.
I want to get back to my question. Do you have empirical evidence that empirical evidence is the only kind that can be had?
No, that's why I never made that assertion. And so we're going back again to where I have to explain to you again that I didn't say that I didn't allow other kinds of evidence. You can have subjective evidence. I've now told you this, 4 or 5 times? What is your excuse for not getting it by now?
First, you keep interrupting me.
Don't bring this up again, and don't accuse me again of things I still have never done as if I've done them again.
So
now,
I'm asking a question.
You asked me to name a scholar.
I'm asking a clarification. I'm asking a clarification. Are you implying, and again, it's a question, not an opportunity to you to go on another rant.
I didn't go on a rant.
Are you implying that if it's not scientific evidence, it's subjective evidence?
I said I would allow for objective evidence. I also said that not everything can be proven scientifically. Some things can be proven logically.
Okay.
I specified that, and not everything can be proven logically. There's some things that can only be proven scientifically. I specified that too. How many more times will you make me repeat these answers before you get them?
So
would you like to hear a scholar?
So
since you asked.
So.
All right.
Okay. Okay. Hold on. I asked these things not to challenge you. I'm really trying to get clarification.
You're not challenging me.
In other words,
I think you are.
Do you know what I meant by challenge? In other words, I'm not trying to push back on what you're saying. I'm trying to get clarity. See how you take everything so defensive.
No, I don't. I'm not defensive at all.
Yeah, defend yourself.
I brought you on here so that I could reason with you because you've made a very clear and obvious mistake, and so I'm here to help you.
That you naming a scholar who specializes in Koine Greek.
I don't. Once again, I repeat. Why do I have to keep repeating this? If I'm absolutely right, then every scholar in Koine Greek will agree that pistis means belief or conviction or trust or whatever, and that only one of those has the implication that it is without scientific evidence. So no expert in Koine Greek would say what the disingenuous question assumed, that pistis means denying faith or evidence. If I'm absolutely correct, they won't say that. So of course, I'm getting a scholar that doesn't say that, who doesn't follow the straw man of what I never said or held or believed. I'm actually getting somebody who supports what I actually said. Do you want to keep barking at the straw man, or you want to give it up?
I haven't been barking at all, actually.
So you won't bring up Koine Greek again because after the 5th explanation, I
am telling you.
So you understand? Just clarifying. Do you now understand that any expert in Koine Greek is going to agree with what I said, that pistis means all these different things, and not necessarily without evidence, and certainly not denying evidence or reason, unless it's in the context of the way that the word is used, right?
Unless it's in the context of the way the word is used.
Right.
What
If
do you
it's
mean by that?
implied that you are supposed to believe this simply because you're told to, or simply because of this authority, or because you're going to go to hell if you don't, then yes, that's the implication.
No, it's not the implication, and neither do I see that in Scripture. And again,
Yes, it certainly is all throughout
so we're
Scripture.
agreeing that pistis is confidence or trust. Yes.
It can be a confidence, it can be persuasion, it can be trust, yes.
Okay.
It is not
So that-
dependent on scientific evidence.
So, and then you throw that last thing in there at the end, which I don't even think is
because
relevant.
that's
to the word.
that's my definition. That's the definition for all the dictionaries, for all the theologians, so on. From the beginning on down, yes.
So
Jesus on down,
it's
yes.
confidence or trust. So when the Bible talks about pistis, it's talking about confidence or trust.
And the implication and the way that it is used, blessed is he who has not seen and yet believed, walking in faith, not in sight. We trust not in what is seen, but what is not seen. Rely not on your own understanding. Believe
that mean?
what you're told.
Exegete that for me, please.
I'm sorry, what?
Exegete that for me. What those passages you just quoted. What does that mean?
What does what mean? Which
the
one?
passages you just quoted.
Which
Exegete.
one? I just quoted several of them. Which one?
Pick one.
Walking in faith, not if you'd had actually watched the video that you said was not.
I did.
If you had actually watched the video that you said was not a response, you would have seen citations explaining that religious belief is assuming that you're hoping that this position is true, and then continuing on as if it is true. So you hope that this is true. This is the faith is the hope that it's true, not seeing that it is true. You don't get the evidence of it. You simply assume it and believe it.
Okay, so tell me what you think of this analogy. And I heard Tyler really use it earlier, and I thought it was a good one. Let's say it seems as if you're implying that evidence must be something that you can see. Is that the case?
In the implication of the Bible, yes. They don't have a nuanced view of it as we do now, but yes, they think that evidence is something that you see. You
I'm asking about you, not what the
because you see,
Bible
not
says.
because I told you to.
I'm asking Aaron Raw, do you think that evidence is something that necessarily must be seen? You don't, right?
Evidence in one way or another can be detected, even if we have to use other instruments to do that. But it doesn't necessarily have to be seen. There are ways that we can detect things like redshift, for example,
Okay.
things the human eyes would never be able to pick up.
Here's what I'm getting at, is that you're making, and I know you're going to say you're making a lot of assertions that I disagree with, and you make them so many at once that it's hard to track.
Okay, what assertion do you think I'm making?
So when you talk, so first of all, you're assuming all these things about religious people and believers, the assertions that you think, okay, even earlier that we never even got to finish because we jumped to so many topics about, you think why I believe in the soul, and you said, here's why I believe it. And
I realize that you don't realize that. You think it's for a different reason, but collectively people in general have this belief because they got the idea from a misunderstanding of the content of air.
And then you even said that you know there's no soul, you know there's no God, and it's impossible for that to be the case, which I think is absurd.
I said that's evidently true. I didn't say that I knew that. I said this is the argument of what is evidently true, and I can show the evidence to back it. Why do you have to misrepresent everything I say?
So you don't. It's evidently true, but you don't know it. How can you not know something that's evidently true?
Because science goes exactly opposite of faith in that we don't pretend to know things we don't know.
And you think I pretend to know things I don't know?
Again, if you've ever said that Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life, then you've made an assertion of baseless speculation that you have stated as fact. And that I find to be wholly dishonest.
Why is it not a fact?
Because a fact is objectively verifiable data.
Objectively verifiable data, and by objectively verifiable, what do you mean by that?
A fact is either a point of data that is not in dispute, like say taken for granted for a hypothetical situation or an element of a story perhaps, or it is something that is indisputable in that it is something that can be objectively verified. You don't take as fact something that somebody asserts unless it's a hypothetical situation. So if somebody's going to state that something is a fact, that Jesus is, or that God will do this or whatever, then you have to show some substance for that. Now, if we're just talking about within the confines of the story, and the story clearly says that, okay, well, the fact within the story is fine.
What objectively verifiable? Can you answer that? What do you mean by objective?
I don't have to believe you, right? I don't have to accept what you say on faith. There's a way to check it. I mean, often I have arguments with people about religion, right? And where they will say the Bible says X, and I will say no, it doesn't say that.
My question, objectively.
I was answering the question.
It's a very long-winded way of answering the question.
You wouldn't have any idea since you interrupted me again, so you don't know what the answer is. But when people tell me that the Bible doesn't say that, I can say, yes, it does say that, and I'll show you exactly where it says that. And then they'll say that the Bible says this other thing. No, it doesn't, and you can't show me where it doesn't, because how do you show somebody where something doesn't say something? I can only show where it does say something.
Okay, my question was, what do you mean by objectively verifiable?
The example I just gave, and you're not tracking very well.
Okay, so that you can.
If you want to say that the Bible doesn't say X, and I say that it does, I can show you where it does. And now we're both looking at where the Bible says that it does say that, and that's objective verification. We have the fact. We have the fact that is independent of either of our opinions. And the interesting thing about that is, because I can challenge myself just as well. So I may remember things, and I've gone through this, where I remember things where I think vividly, and then when I go to check the data, I prove myself wrong.
Okay, so
something incorrectly.
Okay, so you gave me and I'm not pushing back in a challenging way by this question. When I asked for what do you mean by objectively verifiable, you gave me the example of, here's this in the Bible, no, yes, let me show you.
So the definition of the word objectively means that it doesn't depend on an individual's opinion or perspective.
Mm-hmm.
So the fact of the matter, we can check, and it doesn't have to be my opinion on it. I mean, we can verify it. And my opinion could be wrong, and I just misremember it. And then when I check the data, when I actually read what it says, maybe I remembered it incorrectly, as has happened before.
Okay, can you define objectively verifiable? I know what objective means, objectively verifiable. So, or would this definition work? Something that can. Well, no, I'd rather you say it, because don't give me an example. Give me like an actual working definition. Objectively verifiable means, not here's an example of.
Again, a fact that we can both verify, regardless of faith. You say the Bible doesn't say that. I say it does. We crack the book open and see if it actually says that. We're both looking at it.
So
now we know.
So you're saying objectively verifiable means something we can both verify. That was your definition?
Well,
that's a tautology.
To be specific, it's something that doesn't depend on an individual opinion or perspective. So what the book actually says is regardless of my opinion or perspective.
Okay, but you used the phrase objectively verifiable.
Right, and I explained it 4 times.
You're defining objectivity right now. What is objective? But objectively
verifiable means that we can both check the fact that is independent of our perspective.
Okay, so here, can I challenge you on this? And I do mean that, and can I push back here? See, here are the things that you're asserting that I don't agree with a lot of your definitions, because I think your epistemology is all over the place. I think that your perspective on things is flawed, and this is why I would say it's biased to the pursuit of truth.
And maybe that's why I have the perspective that you are all over the place and I'm trying to stay focused, and so you're accusing me of the very thing that you're doing through projection.
So, if something's not objectively verifiable, can I call it a fact?
No.
Okay.
Much like the truth.
Just a yes or no.
You can't honestly declare that something is the truth if you can't show that it is true.
So you have to show that it's true before you can claim it's true?
Right. If you make an assertion of, if I assert anything and I don't have the evidence to back it up, if I can't show it, that I can't show that it's true, then I got no business saying that it's true. I have to be able to show the evidence that implies that position.
Okay, so if you tell me you're in pain, I can't objectively verify that because that's a mental state and conscious, not physical. What's that?
You can't verify it.
Okay, so then how would you objectively verify that? And if you can't, then I guess you can't claim it's a fact?
I think there's probably ways of laboratory testing to see if I'm in pain, certainly. But you wouldn't be able to test that on the fly, no.
And I'm not talking about the fly. Take whatever experiment you want. You can objectively verify with test the mind.
Yes.
How?
And it's not just the mind. There's also there's sensory apparatus and a number of different ways that we can tell how the nervous system is going to respond to certain types of damage that they can detect and so forth. There would be ways of objectively verifying whether I'm in pain, though it may not be possible for you to do that. So if I tell you that I have a headache, you don't know for a fact if I'm lying.
Well,
It would be very difficult to determine that.
So, because here's what I'm getting at here, because it goes to challenging your definition. I would say consciousness is not physical. I would say there'd be no physical impairment.
And I would say that consciousness is definitely physical. I'm sorry, it's wrong. Consciousness is definitely physical.
If I interrupt you every time you're wrong, you wouldn't have to be able to say anything.
Well, if you contradict me every time that I'm wrong, then you shouldn't have interrupted me yet.
Okay, well, actually, you interrupted me.
Okay, but I haven't been wrong yet.
So, if consciousness is not physical, there'd be no way to empirically or scientifically test it. You're saying that someone could detect scientifically or empirically that you're in pain. How would they do that?
The same way that we verify that consciousness is definitely physical.
How?
And they could even read thoughts into speech at this point. There's many different ways that we can see the mechanics of how the brain works, how the nervous system interacts with the brain. All of it is entirely physical.
So you're saying it's physical because it can see things happen in the brain.
Physically, yes. There are electrochemical signals to verify. They can detect love, which was a favorite argument that people used to say, well, you can't prove there's such a thing as love. Yeah, there's actually chemical signature for several different types of love.
Let me just jump to it because I don't, it's hard for me to get anything out, so I'm just going to have to just jump in there. My thoughts can be true or false. No part of my brain can be true or false. The mind is not the same thing as the brain, nor is it reducible to the brain.
The mind is a product of the brain, by definition.
So is the mind physical or not? I don't agree with you there, but is it physical or not?
Well, it's objectively verifiable. Doesn't matter what you believe. The mind is a product of the brain, by definition, and also by verification.
Physical or not physical?
Physical.
Okay, and how do you know that? Because you see things happen in the brain.
Because we can also chemically alter the brain, both through basic chemicals or also through damage to the brain.
So that proves that, therefore, we know that the brain is physical.
Yes.
Okay, but you
and also beyond that, we can also.
But we suppose the mind is just the brain.
The mind, once again, I repeat, is a product of the brain. The mind is the data that is produced by a brain.
And who defines it that way?
I don't know. I don't know who defined it.
So you haven't looked at the philosophy of mind then?
No, I haven't looked at who defined the mind as being a product of the brain. I'm sure somebody did. I could look it up. Does it really matter who?
It does, because it shows once again that your alleged 20, maybe 2 years, whatever you said, of research is not very good to detect truth.
Understand, I've had this argument for 20 years.
If you have not looked into this and you're making assertions, and
hello, I'm not the one making assertions.
You're making a lot of assertions.
What I have had is 20 years worth of people telling me that they have scientific evidence for God.
I don't say.
And me saying, no, you don't. For 20 years, we have this argument. And that's what I've been doing. And you said that doesn't exist. I'm sorry, it has. And I've actually got documentation to show it, because I do have 20 years worth of arguments on the web that we can show. So yeah, that actually happened.
That matter.
What?
Point is, what does that matter?
It matters that you're wrong again, as you have been like every fucking sentence since we started this, and you've been accusing me, and we haven't even gotten to the topic because you have bounced everywhere, and we've been trying to stay focused. You said you had 4 or 5 points that you were going to address, and we haven't addressed them. Except
we're addressing one of them right now. Is that one of my accusations was that you're being disingenuous,
and that's wrong. And I demonstrated that.
That your research was flawed and biased.
Which is obviously not the case, because I've already shown you that I can give you documentation on the web for 20 damn years. I can show you the debate we had with Kent Hovind months ago. How many times have I argued with creationists that give this exact thing? When I argue with anybody that says they have scientific evidence. Only when I argue with Cy Gart the other day, when he said he had scientific evidence and then conceded that he didn't.
This is why we can't get anywhere. You keep interrupting me. This is why I wanted to moderate.
See that discussion I had with Cy Gart?
I believe so.
Okay, so you saw where he said that he had scientific evidence and then realized that, and then conceded that he didn't.
No, I haven't finished my point, right?
Okay. So is that a yes or is that a no? You saw that he said he had scientific evidence, and then conceded that he didn't, right?
I don't remember that part,
So I
honestly.
got 20 years of that. Okay, and that's what I can verify because I can show. You can watch videos, so you can read the articles that are written that have been in correspondence with other people or debates that have been online.
Okay, so you
So it isn't disingenuous. It isn't dishonest. It isn't a lie. It actually happened.
That wasn't my point.
Well, you wanted to say that there was something flawed or biased about it, and I proved that's not the case.
I say two
I
words.
give these specific examples, and you can't contest any of them. All you can do is do the no true Scotsman fallacy. Well, that guy's arguing, and I get that, because there are as many different perspectives on Christianity as there are Christians.
You done?
Am I done? I think we probably are. So,
Well, I mean, with your rant there, because I didn't. That wasn't my point.
okay.
That was not my
make
point.
a point.
Well, if I can even get a sentence out, it'd be nice.
You've gotten plenty of sentences out, and I've only had to correct about half of them.
So my point was, like what we just talked about now, I'm challenging the way that you present or look for evidence. I'm challenging that as being flawed. You're saying
Flawed.
that was the end of my sentence.
Okay, how is it flawed?
For example, if you're going to say there's no soul, and then saying that you haven't even looked into this field of study, which studies these things, nor have anyone who defines mind as the way you do, then you are obviously biased, and you're coming up with your own definitions that you can't even name someone who's an expert in the field.
How do you imagine that I'm biased?
I just told you how. You don't even look into this stuff.
I do. That's yet another false statement out of a long string of false statements from you. So I do look into this and have looked into this many times, but I have never seen any evidence that a soul is even possible. And once again, I need to repeat how we determine whether something is possible. Can we say that something is possible when it evidently isn't?
Is the soul evidently not possible?
It is not evidently possible. And according to Sean Carroll, it is evidently not possible.
Okay, define evidently possible. How do we know whether or not something...
It is supported by evidence.
No, that's not what evidently possible means. Possibility, and are you talking about logical possibility, broadly logical possibility, metaphysical
Again, I clarify again that we're talking about science.
I am not. If we're talking about the soul...
All right, then we don't... Do we have anything further to discuss? Because I'm not going to talk about metaphysics. I'm going to talk about things we can verify. I'm going to talk about science.
Metaphysics.
If you don't want to talk about science, you can go on and talk to somebody else. Do you have anything to say to me now?
So if you're saying you want to end it, that's fine with me. We haven't even gotten anywhere. You keep interrupting me.
I'm sorry that you didn't
just
focus and wanted to change the topic to philosophy or metaphysics, but we were talking about science from the get-go. Now, if you want to stray from that to talk about something else, go talk to somebody who's interested in something else.
So, because I disagree...
No, I didn't. It has nothing to do with whether you disagree. We're talking about science, not metaphysics.
I have not been talking about science. I even said that in the beginning.
Okay, then we've wasted the whole last hour and a half. Because I've been talking about science, and that's what this whole thing was about. It was never at any time about what you personally believe.
You've been making a lot of philosophical assertions.
No, I haven't. We were talking specifically,
scientism,
exclusively about science.
You've been talking about epistemology,
not metaphysics.
No, you've been talking epistemology, which is a branch of philosophy, and you've been inferring scientism. You've been talking philosophy.
I haven't been talking about scientism, and I know what scientism is. So no, I haven't been.
You've been
talking. I was specifying that faith is not based on scientific evidence, and we know that. And if it was based on scientific evidence, then as I pointed out during the debate, then you and many other Christians before you would have been able to give what that scientific evidence is. But despite the fact that I've had 20 years of various different believers telling me that they have scientific evidence of God, they can never come up with it. You know what they usually come up with instead? Well, you can't explain how life started. That's what they think. The logical fallacy of God of the gaps. That's what they think. Evidence of
is that relevant? Why is that relevant to me?
Because it directly addresses the false accusation you made against me. One of
which was the accusation that faith is not a belief that's not based on evidence or goes against the evidence, or that faith.
Simply scientific evidence. Yes.
So,
And
but
as I verified, we have a
that
number
was my
of religious organizations that
that
have
was, okay, look, I try to.
we have a number of religious organizations that have posted statements of faith wherein they admit that they will not change their mind despite any scientific evidence to the contrary.
Earlier, I tried to be charitable and say if you said that I didn't hear it. Hence, that would imply my accusation was specifically your statements and assertions that faith was against evidence or against reason or pretending to know what you don't know. That was my accusation.
I got that.
Okay,
I understood.
Okay, right. Then.
So I was just adding that we have religious organizations that do post statements of faith saying that they will not change their mind regardless of any evidence to the contrary, scientific evidence.
No, I've had atheists say the same thing. What does that prove?
You have
I have
not had atheists say
really.
Yeah, that they would deny scientific evidence.
So not only do you know everything about what I believe, or rather, you know why I believe. You also know the people I've talked to in the past.
Yeah, cough it up.
So you are making assertions as facts as though they are facts, pretending to know what you don't know, which by your definition,
an accusation against me, and you were wrong every time.
And then
you're making an assertion about some unnamed other person who says things that nobody else would say. So yeah, I'm going to call that out. I don't believe you. So
okay, that's fine to say you don't believe me, but don't say it's never happened, because it has.
Okay, it's possible that you ran into an incredibly stupid person. I grant incredibly stupid people exist. But there's no reason any atheist who calls himself an atheist as opposed to calling themselves a Buddhist or a Taoist or whatever would ever tell you that they are going to ignore scientific evidence. No.
Didn't you call that a no true Scotsman fallacy earlier?
No, I didn't.
It applies to me, right? It only applies to me, but it doesn't apply to you as an atheist.
Oh no. It's not. There's no false equivalency. There's no. If you're a Muslim, right, and you're going to speak on behalf of Christians, is that a no true Scotsman? If the whole
if you're an atheist,
okay, if the purpose of being atheist, the purpose of being Christian is to believe that Christ is your savior, right? The purpose of being atheist, you're going to accept scientific evidence, right, over faith.
That's not the purpose of being an atheist.
Oh, gee, what would I know?
I don't know. I'm trying to figure it out.
So I get told all the time that the reason I'm atheist is because I just want to sin, or some other equally wrong answer. But it really comes down to this. The reason that I'm atheist is because I don't want to be fooled into believing something that is not evidently true.
And that's why. That's why
I only accept things that we can show to be true. I'll leave open any possibility if you can show me that it is a possibility.
So that's an interesting epistemological position you have, which is a branch of philosophy. You can only believe what can shown to be true, but you cannot show that very statement to be true. So why do you believe it?
What do you mean I can't show that statement to be true?
You should only believe what you can show to be true. Show me that.
Documentation to show that. Yeah.
In other words,
I will entertain any possibility if you can show me that it is possible.
Okay, so anything,
but I won't necessarily be convinced of it unless the evidence implies that, unless I'm compelled by the evidence to believe.
Same here. So something is possible as long as there's no logical contradiction. That's where you get strict possibility.
If, as I said,
correct,
you can't say something. So we have, how do we verify whether something is possible? We have a precedent or a parallel or a verified phenomenon indicating that such possibility exists. So if you don't have that, then we literally have no possibility.
Okay, so you can't verify something's possible unless you have a parallel. What else did you say?
A precedent or parallel, right? Something that indicates that possibility. Like, of course, we know that this can happen because this other thing can happen. It's the same process.
So if,
or we have a verified phenomenon. Remember what I said about if there was such a thing as a supernatural?
So it was a simple question though. So
it's a simple answer if I could get through it. So
I think you did.
What?
I thought you already gave me the answer. Parallel or something preceding.
And then I'm trying to explain what that is because you didn't understand.
No, I did.
The verified phenomenon would be if there was a supernatural, for example, we would be able to have somebody demonstrate that supernatural thing to in fact occur, whether that's exorcism or faith healing or magic spells or whatever the hell it is. And for arguing with creationists, for example, whether we want to talk about whether evolution is possible, we can demonstrate that evolution actually happens at this level. So we actually have a mechanism that works, and we just need to extrapolate from there. So that's what I mean by establishing that there's a verified phenomenon. Another good example. Big Bang, right? We have the red shift implying the universal.
Okay, so
So we have a verified phenomenon indicating that such.
So we know something is possible if we have a verified phenomenon that it's possible. So we know it's possible only if it's possible, is essentially what you're saying. What I'm saying
If we can
is
show
something is
that a
possible.
possibility exists, which if you want to put it that way, if you want to phrase it as a tautology, fine. If we can show that there is
Yes,
a possibility, then we can say that there is.
So if a possibility exists, and it exists, that's a tautology. You have not described or asserted or moved the conversation forward at all. Something is logically possible if there's no logical contradiction.
Again, I
You
did
understand
move
that?
the conversation further by saying that we have to have a verified phenomenon to show whether a possibility exists.
So it's
Right.
so you're saying a possibility exists.
So
if
you want to
have-
say that God is possible, but you can't show.
I did not know. I'm saying I disagree with your tautology that you have horrible definitions.
Whatever it is you want to believe.
That your epistemology is all over the place and self
All over. Okay, we're obviously not going to make it that way. I'm sorry that we had this. I really wanted to get to at least some of the points that you brought up against me. I thought that this would be fairly concise. But just like it was with Tyler Villa, we ended up spending 2 hours not beginning to get to the point. So it's very, very frustrating. You guys are so very defensive. I don't know where to begin. So an hour and 45 minutes, we've done nothing so far, except that you did concede that I was correct about faith being, religious faith not being dependent on scientific evidence.
belief in God not being dependent on scientific evidence. Is what I
I'm
said.
glad we got that far. If I could achieve nothing else, at least we did that. I
Right,
could,
which I never even accused you of.
what's that?
I never accused you of saying that.
Your video got lots of people chiming in to me to tell me that was incorrect. That I had already been correct about whether religious faith was based on scientific evidence. So that's why we're having this conversation, so that people understand.
People understand what? I'm sorry?
So that I will stop having these people chime in to tell me that faith is based on scientific evidence. Because that's what I've been hearing from creationists for 20 damn years, like I keep telling you.
Okay, but you also said that in 20 years, people always argued the definition of faith with you. So which one is it? That they either used it that way or they don't use it that way?
What do you mean, which one is it?
So you in the debate with Michael Jones, you said every Christian I've ever debated tells me I'm using the wrong definition of faith.
Yeah, they all tell me that it's based on evidence.
Okay.
Yeah.
So which is it, Arn? Are people saying that it is based on scientific
Which
evidence?
is the thing that matches the other thing? It's both those things.
Okay, so
I
not
made two
every
statements that agree with each other. That I've had 20 years of people telling me that they have scientific evidence, and then I show that they don't have scientific evidence, that they in fact have a logical fallacy they're calling scientific evidence, but that it doesn't qualify as scientific evidence. Then we have to argue about what scientific evidence is, and that's when they start telling me that I can't prove whether reality is real.
Okay, Arn, if your entire position is that belief in God is not based on scientific evidence, you've wasted 20 years of your life thinking that. Because
Except that I'm arguing with creationists who do exactly
you're talking
want
to
to
me.
teach in school.
You're talking to me.
They want to teach in school that they have scientific evidence for creation. And one of the claims that they make for scientific evidence of creation is that nobody can explain how life came about, or what was the origin of the universe, or what have you. Or they want to make up some other lie, and they want to do this out of the gaps fallacy.
Okay, there's
Fallacies are not evidence, and I have to have over and over and over again.
yes, you repeat yourself over and over again, but a lot of what you're saying is not
If you saw the debate that I had with Hogan, you would have seen everything that I just demonstrated here repeated a bunch of times. And now you're going to tell me that it never happened.
I didn't say it never happened. I did not say it never happened. I said it doesn't apply to me.
Who cares if it applies to you?
Because you're talking to me.
It has to apply to you. It's irrelevant.
So you don't care what I have to say, it's irrelevant, yet you invited me on here to talk about it.
Did I invite you on because I don't care what you have to say? Obviously, I care what you have to say. But your personal beliefs are irrelevant to any of these claims. Sorry, it just are.
Okay, but I've
You
never...
want to tell me that I haven't had the 20 years experience that I actually did have, that I can actually objectively prove that I really did have. And then you want to tell me that
I've never denied that.
because it doesn't apply to you. But it doesn't matter if it applies to you.
I have never denied that Christians have told you that.
Okay,
I am
good.
saying, I've never denied that. I said
So then
that
you shouldn't have told me that I didn't have these experiences for 20 years that I actually did have.
No, I'm
Just
saying that
say, I agree you actually had those experiences for 20 years.
I agree that you had those experiences for 20 years.
Thank you.
I've never denied that. What I was saying was that, so see, and this is what I'm saying. We want to get on the same page here, which we have not done, and I'm fine if you still want to end it. My point was that if the fact that you couldn't name a scholar in 20 years. So I was implying.
But I can, many of them.
Okay, right.
But not
I'm-
for the dishonestly worded question.
I at least want you to understand what I was saying because it seems that you don't. I never denied you had those experiences.
Okay.
Or-
What
so
is
I-
it you're saying?
Well, that when you can confidently assert something, and yet you have not looked into the field of what you're asserting about, it
Which
makes
is already a mistake because I have looked into the field.
so something like philosophy of mind. You've looked into that.
Yeah, when you asked me for the scholar, I got the scholar. It's just
How
not
about-
according
okay.
to the disingenuous question. So that if I get asked a fallacious question, I don't then have to support the fallacious question. Okay? So when I'm trying to explain to some critic how we are apes, and he demands that I prove how he's not an ape, that's literally what somebody asked me 3 days ago. And I said, well, how can I prove that you're not an ape? I just said that you are. So don't do that to me again. If I found a scholar who actually does agree with what I said, that's not the fallacious question. The question remains fallacious.
So, the example I was giving when you cut me off was, in other words, I was trying to go back to the debate. I was trying to what we've just talked about here. Look, philosophy of mind. I asked you who defined mind that way. You said you didn't know, which shows me you have not looked into this field of study. Yet you're so adamant about what you believe about it.
So
And
because I don't know what was the name of the first guy who comes up with the
I don't know anyone who defines mind that way.
Okay.
Atheist or Christian scholar who is in the philosophy of mind. Not John Searle, not Dennett what?
Dennett does.
Well, he does away with the mind, does away with consciousness.
No, he doesn't.
Yeah, he does.
No, he doesn't.
Okay.
I'd
encourage you to look
I
up-
was told
look up
by a PhD professor of philosophy that Daniel Dennett denied that the mind even exists, that he himself, Daniel Dennett, doesn't exist. And I had no idea how to answer the guy because I'd never heard such poppycock before. So there I am standing there facing the guy, and I got nothing to say. So I have to go home and look it up. And then sure enough, I find it both in text and on video. I found where Daniel Dennett said the exact opposite, where he actually said that the mind doesn't exist in any one part of the brain, but that it is an emergent property of the entirety of the brain. So he does define it the way I said, and I have looked into it, and you've done nothing but false assumptions since we started.
I will appeal to the experts here who specialize in this, like an atheist philosopher, John Searle, who has a conversation with Dennett, which you can look up online, and they talk about this very subject.
Okay.
But
you understand that I've already read it, and I've already seen it.
You read what?
And it says the very thing that I just said.
Okay,
Right?
that's okay. That's fine. That's fine. I don't want to go into a tangent. My point is,
Yeah, I don't either.
when you can't name people who specialize in these fields that you're so
And I
adamant
can.
about and you have strong beliefs in, then Dennett does not define mind as data.
What would you call it then? The information? Because that's what I define data as.
I would say that things like consciousness are defined ostensibly.
Okay.
That there's 5 states.
But I still include the consciousness as part of the data, but that's me. So it's
Okay.
a product of the mind, and as he said, it is an emergent property of the totality of the mind. It's not
Even then-
necessarily from a single region of the brain.
Even then, you'd be a property dualist, and dualism adheres to immaterial properties.
Except that I'm quoting what Dennett said. Right? So it's not me, it's him.
Okay, if you believe that, you'd be a property dualist.
Yeah, I looked into this.
You
So
look.
is there any other false accusations you want to make before we?
I think this is clearly not a false accusation. You think it is, but
I don't think you've made a legitimate accusation so far.
Okay.
You've made a lot of false ones.
like your
You haven't
defense.
made a legitimate one so far.
You don't interrupt. That was an accusation.
Yeah, I do. Correct. And when you start a premise on when you start a false premise, your conclusion is going to be equally false.
Okay,
So-
don't conflate false with you disagree with. Those are two different things.
No, when you state something that is actually false, yeah, I'm going to